So, as I mentioned before the break, this is a chance to, well, I think it's absolutely apparent that the responses and strengthening resilience of the Cape rests fundamentally in the foundation of who we are as a people and what we are prepared to do and what we want our future to look like, and also as a people, how we work really productively with our local governments and state government, of course, as well, but and how government also collaborates with us. So the first session is about the community itself and our ability to steward our future and come together to make sometimes difficult decisions. So once again, we'd like to introduce this another arts performance from the Lanesville event. And this was done shortly after, the attacks on comedians. And you could see that comedians can tell the stories that some of us can't in writing. So our local screenwriter, long time, and also lawyer, Ken Riaf, through political satire, will tell us an important story that often goes unsaid about polarization here and how to understand that and what to do about it. So, Ken.
Hi, what? Oh, yeah, can do that, yeah. Hi, folks. Okay, don't want to get in anybody's way here. Hi, everybody. Yes, well, I'm supposed to administer the, this one? Okay. Okay, one mic. Okay, oh, there we go. Okay. You've explained it so even I can understand. Thank you. Folks, hi, everybody. I'm here to administer the Gloucester Citizenship Test, which, as you're well aware, in order to be a citizen of the United States, you have to apply and you have to take a citizenship test. What's the capital of the United States? Who was the first president? How many states are there? And actually, I've just read recently where they made it a little more difficult. I don't know if you saw that, but and why do we have that entrance exam? It's because so we have a baseline of common knowledge, and that folks can demonstrate that they've studied enough to show that they really want to be here and understand how things work and the history and culture of their new home. I'm thinking we need something like that here in town, and for folks wanting to live in Gloucester, because what's happened here and what's happening here is that people come, and before they, unpack their bags, they want to let those of us who are already here know how to improve things. And even though we already know that change, by the way, is it's inevitable, but progress isn't. And so, people get those two things confused. So in any event, there are things that we really like here. The picturesque decay, the smell of dead fish in the noonday sun, in the cut bridge, stuck in the open position. So, all the familiar potholes. So in any event, I'm testing out some of these citizenship questions, and I'll try them out here. They fall into some different categories: true or false, multiple choice, fill in the blank, some geography questions, names and events, and sort of general knowledge. So in any event, I'll start off, and you can just yell out the answers if you think you know them. These are true or false questions. Annisquam is not in Gloucester. True or false? Well, you ask somebody from Annisquam, and then you'll find out. True or false? Eastern Point has 6 speed bumps. True or false? Well, it's true, but if you want to get out of, you have to go over the same one. So it's really 12. Oh, there are some trick questions in here. So Uh, George's Bank and Stellwagen Bank are federally chartered and insured saving institutions. True or false? Okay. A steamer is a Finnish sauna. True or false? Okay. All right. True or false? This is. These are not easy. The Greasy Pole, Tally's Hookers, and Goose Cove are all in the red light district. Okay. True or false? Gloucester is a good place to be born and a good place to die, but in the middle, you should get out. Okay. Correct pronunciations. Scallops or scallops? Good, that's good, that's correct. Get filleted or get filleted? Okay, all right. We'll just move on to the multiple choice questions here. Who has the right of way in a rotary? A, everyone. B, no one. C, the other guy. And D, after me, you're first. Okay, yeah. McPherson Park is A, a park, B, a building, C, what McPherson does with his car, and D, a Scottish-Korean law firm. B, it's a building, thank you. Okay, these are fill in the blank. Howard. Well, actually, I was thinking of Howard Frisch, the accountant over on Main Street there, but okay. But that's a good guess. Joni on the. Okay, good. Manchester by the Sea, Gloucester by the. Okay. Oh, yes, Gloucester is a blank. What? It's a place to go fishing from. These are geography questions. What direction is up the line? South. Thank you. Good. Yes, right. It's not. Yeah. Where is Cloudy Bank? No, this is a tough one. That's where the bubbler used to be in the middle of the harbor where the sewage outfall pipe was. It's Cloudy Bank. If you live in this place, you can drive anywhere in the world without going through Rockport. Thank you. What's the nearest bar to the State Fish Pier? What? Okay, good. Yes, okay. I think I saw you there once. Where's the dummy in the road? Where? You got it. Railroad, Maplewood, and Prospect. That's where the dummy in the road is. And there's some others, but those are actually people. Where is the extension? Good. She got it. The extension. The extension of what? Okay. And in that vein, which comes first, Grant Circle or Blackburn Circle? Thank you. That was another trick question, right? Yeah, depends which direction you're coming from, right? Can anybody here spell Shimotaro? Oh, yes, that's good. Thank you. Appreciate that. In Gloucester, are there more salons or saloons? Anybody? Yeah. Okay, folks, well, you're doing okay, and what I'm going to do is the last one here, and that is people come to Gloucester to see the man at the... the Packy. The Packy. Okay, thank you, folks. See you.
Thank you, Ken. I've had the good fortune my entire public life of never following a comedian, so let's see how this goes. We know that our capacity to respond to the challenges that we face has a lot to do with how we communicate with each other, who's communicating with who, and our relationship between the government and those governed. Obviously, you here with town rule and town meeting have a long history of that. Have a lot more to say about those forms of communication maybe than we know about. In this context, we've got two amazing colleagues joining us. First of all, Jason Beckfield, Community and Communication.
Thank you so much, Charles, and thanks to everyone for sharing your time, and your energy with us today. I love being here. I love trying to do my best to learn from you all about what's happening on Cape Ann and what the challenges are. And I want to thank, in particular, my collaborators on this project, Amelia Linton and Sammy Wyman. You guys want to wave? Really, really nice work, guys. Unlike Charles, I have had the misfortune to follow a comedian before. This is actually the second time I've been asked to follow a comedian, and we'll see if this time goes better than last time. But I really loved that. So I want to start by telling you, how we understood the goals of this project. What's the point, right? Why would Charles and Sarah and others be interested in, hearing from a bunch of sociologists on the public and communication and governance on Cape Ann? Our overarching goal, and I think it's actually a shared goal of everyone in the room today, is to find ways to strengthen the capacity for Cape Ann to be climate resilient, right? A great overarching goal. Our specific part of it was the communication and governance piece. How do publics relate to governments? We wanted to identify relevant literature. We wanted to talk about some approaches, best practices, and precedent projects that can be useful for civic leaders as well as broad publics. We were particularly interested in learning local knowledges. It sounds maybe a little exotic to make knowledge a plural, but I'm doing that very intentionally to acknowledge and recognize the fact that actually we all have quite a lot of knowledge about our place and our lives, and that lived experience and that place-based knowledge is extremely valuable in dealing with an array of different problems, but particularly climate problems, which tend to be highly localized in their very nature. We also wanted to review strengths and weaknesses, challenges and opportunities that we see with existing public engagement practices on Cape Ann. On this note, I'll just say I'm quite sure that we've missed very many things. I would have failed that Gloucester citizenship test with flying colors. I don't think I got a single one right. On the fill in the blank, I couldn't even imagine what the options were, right? But what I'm hoping is that from my vantage point as an outsider, but as someone with a lot of affection for Cape Ann, I can hopefully bring something useful to you, as Cape Anners grapple with these very serious problems together. And then, of course, we want to share some recommendations about what folks might do. So I want to say a little bit about the approach we take. What is sociology? What does a sociologist think about? A shorthand for sociology is that it's the study of the spaces between people, right? Like psychologists are interested in what's going on in your mind, right? What's going on in your heart. Economists are interested in what's going on in your wallet, right? Your individual wallet versus other folks' wallet. Sociologists are interested in the things that exist between us, right? So communication between me and you, communication among you all, the kinds of roles that we occupy in social life, the kinds of occupations that we have in social life, the life ways that we share, the life ways that make us different. That's the meat of sociology, right? And what that means is that we tend to attune to differences and inequalities between and among people, right? We tend to attune to social processes that bring people together, very much like the social process that's being enacted today, thanks to Valerie and to Greg and the other organizers, which I think is being done really well to facilitate conversation. And then Collective resources are also something that sociologists are very interested in. You know, what are the resources that exist in Cape Ann and in Gloucester and in the other places on Cape Ann that are durable even as people move in and move out? You know, what can we say about those places that are collective, right? And you know, the Great Storm of 2038 framing, I think, is terrific for showing how these social processes and these social differences might matter for climate resilience. So how did we go about learning? We drew on Charles's Office for Urbanization's reports that are now, you know, well over 1,000 pages. They've been working on this a long time. It's a very rich collection of material on the website, and I would certainly highly recommend it. It's really, really useful. We've engaged in several site visits. We've done focus groups, individual conversations, interviews with several different people in different organizations and industries. We've also used a variety of secondary data. One of the things that we did in June, because the question of climate resilience on Cape Ann is so interesting, we actually convened an exploratory seminar at the Radcliffe Institute in Cambridge to talk about the scholarship of, you know, climate resilience and what it might have to offer in Massachusetts cities and towns. And so if you want to check out those materials are online too. Looked at an array of public documents, census return rates I'm going to return to. We also conducted an organizational census. What are the organizations, what are the groups, what are the communities within community that exist on Cape Ann? Read a lot in the Gloucester Times. You all are so lucky to have a local regional newspaper. That is such a precious thing in the current media environment, and we learned a lot from that. And then, you know, there are really interesting histories that have been written that are helpful to us in trying to understand where folks might be coming from and the experiences people have had. Why on earth am I looking at US Census return rates? I will come back to that, but the reason we looked at US Census return rates, so the rate at which people within a given census tract return their census on the first opportunity, right, after the first inquiry, that turns out to be a relatively cheap and readily available way of assessing the collective efficacy of a community. Right? Sounds very strange, but I'll tell you more about this, and I think it'll come to make sense. So, what ideas do we bring to the table here? We drew on 3 different subfields within sociology that also cross over into other areas. One is political sociology. Here, the major point that we play with in the paper is, you know, the idea that problems, including the problems of climate resilience and climate change, can create opportunities for pragmatic public engagement if those are framed as, you know, highly local problems where policymakers actually want to interact with members of the public on what the very local, I'm talking about like at the house level, right, might be. And so that changes the distribution of political power, we think. And then from environmental justice, we develop a lot of tools for engaging publics in a way that does 3 different kinds of justice. One is recognitional justice, you know, seeing the value in other people. The other, procedural justice, which is different from what's often done in public engagement, which is a bunch of people make decisions at this time point, they keep making decisions at this time point, they then realize, oh goodness, we should probably tell some people about this, and then they tell some people about this, and then they go ahead and do what they were going to do anyway. There's no change. The environmental justice field offers us really great tools to counteract that. And then a really important point, I think, from the environmental justice field that we bring into the analysis of the situation on Cape Ann is the issue of distributive justice. Who wins, who loses, who's winning now, who's losing now, what is the distribution of costs and benefits, what's the distribution of challenges and opportunities, right? We may have these you know, long-term trends. For instance, you heard about them this morning, long-term trends of fiscal precarity. There is still a lot of unevenness and heterogeneity around those central trends, right? So how do we understand that distributional issue socially? From disaster studies, we take the idea that, say that the Great Storm of 2038 scenario, right, were to actually hit Cape Ann, the specific way that that would play out in terms of who suffers what, when and why, the field of disaster studies tells us that those outcomes for people are all going to be about the decisions that people are making now and everywhere in between here in 2038. Think about Hurricane Katrina, for instance. One of the reasons why it had the devastating effects that it had is because Katrina hit a certain system of social institutions and a community that was organized in certain ways, right? If we imagine the kind of resilience that Cape Ann might be able to build, we can imagine a different distribution of impacts from something like the Great Storm of 2038. So that's what we're bringing in, is this idea of differential vulnerability. I'm gonna read every word on this slide. This is to satisfy the academic in me. I'm so accustomed to focusing on, article style talks where you're making some point very rigorously and there's a table with the key findings and you have the meat of the thing, right? And so this slide is really just here to show you that what we've done in this paper is we've tried to connect the dynamic processes that we focus on in our recommendations with the static characteristics that are brought to the forefront of attention by these different frameworks, right? And that's what this table is doing, but that's in the paper, so I'll leave that for you. So Cape Ann's resources. Y'all have a lot of resources, and I'd put them into 3 different categories. One is the cultural and social history. I cannot say how delightful it is that today's event is featuring human creativity, because I think the human creativity that is abundant on Cape Ann is a tremendous resource for solving climate challenges. Humans have not confronted, what we are now confronting before, right? And that requires a lot of creativity. Place attachment, identity, the way that Cape Ann gets inside people, right? What it means to live on this rock together, huge resource. And then collective efficacy, this concept from social science that says one of the key collective resources that exists in communities is collective efficacy. What is collective efficacy? It's 2 things. It's the structure of people connected to each other in and through organizations, plus a general cultural sense that, hey, we can solve our problems together, right? This turns out to have a really, really big impact. And the classic sociological measure of whether a community has high or low collective efficacy is something that's related to the US Census return rates. The classic study is what's called the lost letter experiment, where the researcher walks around communities, right, that are randomly selected, randomly drops letters near post boxes, right? They're right there. Post boxes here, lost letters right here, right? And then the measure of collective efficacy is the rate at which those lost letters are returned, because people in the community take a second to reach down, pick them up, and put them in the mailbox, right? Because, gee, who's the addressee, right? The researcher is the addressee. So census return rates get as close to that as we can in a cheap and readily available way, right? And when we analyzed those census return rates, compared them to other communities around the country, Cape Ann stood out as having a pretty high level, relatively, of collective efficacy. And that's a huge resource. This one I'm going to skip because I think we've actually talked a lot about place identity and the importance of place and how it gets under your skin. I want to come back to collective efficacy and give you some more examples. From the research literature, we know that communities that are higher in collective efficacy do more effective job of planning for the future. They do more effective jobs of communicating between and among publics and governments. They are also more resilient to things like tornadoes, to wildfires, other disasters that have been studied, right? And so from the organizational census and from the census return rates, we know that collective efficacy is a real resource around here, right? And you can see many of the organizations that knit the community together up here on the list. So that's what I'm talking about. Now, as you all know so much better than I do, Gloucester and Cape Ann more broadly has a lot of challenges, right? There are a lot of divides and boundaries among community members that we think can inhibit climate resilience and can inhibit the building and use of collective efficacy, right? These are just some of the boundaries and divides that we observed. There are very, very many others. But I want to focus on just the divide between the government and the public. We actually heard this from both sides, right? We heard this from policymakers, who would say like, all I'm trying to do is to give these people a gift. I'm working so hard. I've gotten this big grant to do this project that I know, because of the experts I've consulted with, is so important for climate resilience, right? And these people will not take my gift, right? In the exact same circumstance, the public on the side of that same issue are saying, why are these government people constantly trying to do stuff to us? Right? Where is this idea even coming from? I wouldn't have designed it this way. I wouldn't think about it this way. And furthermore, I have never even been asked if I think this is a good idea. And I live here, right? So, that's a big issue for climate resilience, as you might imagine, when government officials try to do communication and to build collective resources. And so, in general, our recommendations for more effective public engagement are, I think, very well represented on this spectrum of community engagement. And here, I think the key line is actually the row in the middle in bold, right? And this is a spectrum that goes from ignoring to informing to consulting to involving to collaborating to deferring to. And the line in the middle shows you the message that the community hears from each of these approaches, right? So on the ignore side, your voice, needs, and interests do not matter, right? A little bit better than that, we'll keep you informed. A little bit better than that, we care what you think. A little bit better than that, you are making us think and therefore act differently about the issue, right? That's a pretty radical disjuncture between the consult style and the involve style right there. That's a big pivot. And then more collaboratively, your leadership and expertise are critical to how we address the issue, right? Pretty radical. And then most radical, it's time to unlock collective power and capacity for transformative solutions. Wow, sounds like a lot. It also sounds like the kind of thing that will need to be done for the massive problems of climate change, right? Okay, so our recommendations are all about how to support the collective efficacy that Cape Ann so vividly demonstrates, but also to expand that. How does that work? A lot of it is by thinking systematically about where social network ties come from. Social network ties come from social events, very much like this one, where you're gathering a community of people together to focus on some problem, right? To focus on some stimulus, to watch a movie, right? To hear a comedian. The stimulus can be absolutely anything. But what's happening is that the opportunity is being created for social ties to form, right? So what can governments do to expand such opportunities? One thing they can do is to strengthen what we call social foci, right? A social focus. Today's event is an illustration of a social focus. Public infrastructure, also hugely important. Things like the Lanesville Community Center, for example. And here, I think the one that I really want to zoom in on is number 3, which I think, again, is being so nicely illustrated in the way that today's event is being organized, right? Climate sounds so big and so terrible, and everything is bad, and we're doing everything wrong, and we're all immoral, and we've just burned up the planet. And, I think, that way of thinking, tends to be one that removes people's sense of the ability to do something away, right? And so the fun can't be forgotten. And I thought, Ken's, your satire earlier was just a brilliant example of that. what you were doing, right, was giving people something to focus on, right? You have an audience here to come together to see you, right? That's part of what's going on. But part of what's going on is people are orienting to the same thing, laughing together, sharing notes with each other, right? That kind of stuff. And so at the same time, people are having fun. The kind of collective resource for climate resilience is being built, right? But it's not the thing that we think we're there to do, right? It's just something that kind of happens because people are people. People are wonderful and terrible. So I'm just going to whet your appetite with a case from way outside Cape Ann of a disaster averted by the kinds of social processes that we are recommending. And that's the case of the aftermath of wolf reintroduction in Colorado that could have gone much, much worse than it has. Started off going very, very terribly. Think locally, aftermath of 3A. The coming debate over I-4C2, right? We can see these, okay. The wolf reintroduction case is just a really wonderful example of the ways in which really basic social processes can help in confronting a big public problem and heading off a disaster in this case. So I want to leave you with a quote that's become one of our favorites. There's an important difference between inclusion and belonging. It's the difference between being present and having a real presence. It's the difference between making room for someone when they arrive and missing them when they fail to arrive. Think about that one. It's the difference between welcoming someone's presence and actually aching their absence. It's a beautiful line, I think, and it comes from the NOAA report on centering equity and climate resilience action and planning, all of which are dirty words to the current administration. And nevertheless, you can still find this report online. It's just a little buried in the NOAA website, but it's still there. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Some of you at lunch had a chance to spend time with my colleague and friend Dan Dioka. Dan Dioka is, among other things, a planner, and he spends a lot of time thinking and working on, is in fact an academic expert on how it is that we communicate about various things. And to that, he's going to say something about the game that he's developed, Temperature Check, but also the role of games or other forms of oblique approaches to these topics. Welcome, Dan Dioka.
Okay, so good to be here. Hope some folks had a chance to play Temperature Check, which I'm going to talk about today. So my name is Dan. I am an associate professor in practice in urban planning at the GSD. I think the key word here is practice. I run an urban planning and design firm in New York called Interboro, meaning I'm not an academic. I'm not an economist or a sociologist. So when I was actually invited to be a part of this group, developed a pretty strong case of imposter syndrome. How was I going to create something worthy of this initiative? Didn't want to try to beat any of these sociology luminaries at their own game. So instead, I thought I'd sort of stay in my comfort zone, which in my case entails making engagement tools that allow people to participate in planning. Oh, yeah, thanks. And participate in planning and design projects. So you can see some of them here. Oh, what is going on? Okay, I got it. I think I figured it out. I have to hit right, not down. Okay. So you can see some of them here. Either that, so this is something that we do, either that, or we try to make curricular materials that empower people to talk about planning and design initiatives in meaningful ways. So I'm a planner. I do comp plans, land use plans, zoning overhauls, all that good stuff. But in all these projects, I think engagement empowerment play a really big role. So for this initiative, instead of doing my own research, I decided to take all the research that people who are much smarter than me did and turn them into a game. A game called Temperature Check, which is right over there. What's that? Oh, here we are beta testing it in Charles's kitchen. Yeah. So, so one thing I want to say is that the elements are all based on research that Jason and Diane and everybody did. So all the elements in the game, the storm events, the interventions, the players, all that stuff appear in the research papers. So before I introduce the gameplay, I just want to make a few caveats. So this game is based on very real research about a very real place, but we did take some liberties in the interest of playability. You always do when you make games. It begins with a very serious fiction. Diane, cover your ears. You play as the mayor of Cape Ann. Of course, there's no mayor of Cape Ann. But there you go. We could use a comedian mayor, I'm sure. So anyway, so that's a serious fiction, but bear with me for a minute. You're someone who's making decisions on behalf of the region. Every time we play it, we notice things that could work better, even some things that don't work at all. So if you get a chance to play it, or if you've played it, feel free to share feedback with me. We hope to schedule a follow-up where we do this as a focus group in the near future. So it's done, but not really done. You know, it could continue to evolve. And one more thing, this is a complicated game. I'm going to explain the rules, and you're going to be like, wait, what? How do you play? What does that mean? Don't worry about it. We have a facilitator. So this is not meant to be played like, you know, at home. This is meant to be played in a focus group setting with different people and a facilitator. Okay, with that, I'm going to introduce the game. Okay, here's what you see on the back of the box. Cape Ann is heating up in more ways than one. As the newly elected mayor of this historic coastal region, you'll have to manage more than just rising seas. You'll have to balance the competing crises, including climate disasters, stakeholder unrest, national politics, and a growing pressure to build, develop, and generate tax revenue needed for fund adaptation. Will you greenlight the waterfront hotel to refill city coffers? Will you preserve the marsh that holds back the storm? Can you win grants, deploy the green infrastructure, and still keep developers at the table? Most importantly, can you survive the heat and get reelected? So that's the goal of the game, is to get reelected. So it's a simulator of sorts. It's like it's kind of like you know, putting you in the role of a decision maker. What is it like to manage competing interests? How do you keep things cool? And it's a collective game. So everyone's playing together, making decisions together. Okay, so I'm going to go over the elements. This is the board. So it's actually an abstracted version of Cape Ann. You know, it's very abstract, but you can kind of make out, this is kind of supposed to be Rockport, this is supposed to be, you know, Gloucester, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, now there's a die, you roll it, go around the board. Most of the spots are, I'd say, extra. That's your cue to go to the newspaper kiosk. There is a newspaper kiosk, and you open it up and you read a newspaper. There are actually 5 sections, each of which influences the game differently, so I'll go through each one. We'll start with the weather section. You can't see or read that, don't worry. But the weather section reports on major weather events, each representing a real threat that was identified in one of the other reports. I'll just read a couple. So you might draw coastal erosion. Beloved dune trail washed away by weekend storm. Powerful nor'easter stripped more than 30 feet of dune from the popular Cliffside Trail in Rockport. Conservationists say decades of incremental erosion accelerated this year. It's like watching the coastline age and fast forward, said a volunteer as they surveyed what used to be a bluff. Or maybe you read about the green crab invasion when you pick the newspaper. So trawlers pulled up record numbers of European green crabs this week, triggering alarm across Cape Ann's fishing community. The invasive species devours clams and eelgrass, and with warming waters, its population is booming. They're eating their way through the harbor, said a frustrated shellfisher. Okay, I could go on and on, but you get the idea. There's a whole bunch of those. On the back, when you flip over that, you get a little directions as to what to do. So you get a map that tells you where to take the tile and put it on the board. All right. So, for example, you might, if you pull the storm surge, this is going to tell you that little brown piece there. That's going to tell you where the storm surge hit. These are all the different tiles that are on the game, so they correspond to these newspaper articles, and so you just kind of put them around the game. And so in this one, we've drawn, I can't even read what that is, but that storm surge, and so we put it there. Okay. There's different colors, so like there's blue is hydro hazards, red is heat and wildfire hazards, green are ecological hazards. There's also wind hazards. Okay. Then there's science and technology. So maybe it's all random. You know, you pick up the paper, maybe you're going to pick up the weather section, maybe you're going to pick up the science and technology section. This reports on interventions that combat the effects of climate change. All real, all based on the research that my colleagues did. Here you see them all. I'll read a couple. So maybe you read about rain gardens, bioswales, and vegetative buffers. A new municipal initiative encourages homeowners, businesses, and scholars to install rain gardens, bioswales, and tree trenches. These features reduce runoff, cool the landscape, and filter pollutants. A demonstration garden is already blooming at City Hall. Or maybe it's about dune restoration, right? So each one has like a kind of unique story. These turn over the back, and you also get instructions. Unlike the weather tiles, where you actually have to put them exactly where the card says to put it, you have some choice here. So you, in this case, for dune restoration, you might want to put it where you think there's going to be a storm, so it could be preventive, or you might want to put it where a storm event has already happened. That way it mitigates some storm event that has already happened. So these are all the different tiles. And there they are in their little bin on the bottom. So one thing about this game is that you start out with all the interventions in a, what is it called? It's the, some bin where it's a lab, right? So you don't have access to them when you read about them in the paper. They go into the arsenal, and you could play them at any time. Okay. How do you have to buy these, right? So money also has two bins. So in the top, the taxpayer dollars, and then the Cape Ann dollars. So you collect those as you go around the board. How else do you get those? Let's talk about the real estate section, which introduces development. This is how you get your revenue, mostly, to pay for all of these interventions. So this report, so when you read about them, you kind of unlock them. So it might be an article about some folks who want to build coastal luxury condominiums. Plans have been submitted for a cluster of high-end condos overlooking Good Harbor Beach. Developers tout elevated design, but environmental groups warn of increased flood risk and privatization of public views. Conservation Commission approval is pending. All right, so there's subdivisions, there's all kinds of things. This is what the cards look like on the back. You get these little pieces, and you could play them. And you can play them wherever the instructions tell you to play them. Now, okay. Why wouldn't you play an intervention? Why, you could get money from the hotel. You could mitigate storm events with all these interventions. Well, in short, trade-offs. So that is really what this game is about. And I think at this point it'd be good to introduce the most critical thing about the game. As in real life, everything you do has a ramification. So you always have to think twice. Specifically, playing developments and interventions have a ramification for three things. One, the stakeholders. So this is our best shot at mapping out who the different constituents are. So for example, you've got heritage defenders, generations deep locals with an instinct to protect Cape Ann's history, small town atmosphere, and working class identity. They see unchecked growth as a threat to their way of life and prefer change to be slow and locally driven. So it tells you here some of the things that they like, some of the things that will cool their temperature, some of the things that kind of piss them off and will raise their temperature. There's also new and scenic lifestyle seekers. There's, the Climate Youth Collective, that's like the DSA kids. There's developers, et cetera. So you have to think about the trade-off, right? How are these different developments and interventions, how are they going to reflect the temperatures of these different groups? Then you've got to make sure that your economy is thriving. So housing, fisheries, education, everything you do in the game, every intervention you play, every development you put in, every storm that comes has an implication for housing, fisheries, or education. And then there are the hazards themselves. Obviously, that's the main point of the game. Okay, now, how do you know what the ramification is? This is a good time to introduce the thermometers. This is the one digital part of the game. You'll see why in a minute. So when you place an intervention or development, some constituents' temperatures are going to rise. Some are going to go down. Some sector temperatures, like the tourism sector or the housing sector, they're going to rise too, depending on you building housing or putting in development or whatever. And this is really what you have to monitor as you play the game. So for example, here's the different thermometers, and let's just say, for example, we're going to build a hotel. Okay, you saw what just happened. You really ticked off the heritage defenders. Their temperature went way up. They don't want to see that kind of hotel development on the waterfront. What else happened? You cooled down the development industry. You helped the tourism industry a little bit. One thing to pay attention to always is this global thermometer. It averages all of them. That's the thing that's going to help you win or lose at the end of the game. Let's say that you approve the coastal luxury condominiums. Yeah, you're going to get money, but the trade-off is now you really pissed off the heritage defenders. You even started to piss off the scenic lifestyle seekers, so on and so forth. So everything you do is interrelates, and it has implications for the sectors, the climate, and for the constituents, and that's kind of the fun of the game. Storm surge barriers, even if you're playing these different interventions, some people like them, some people don't. Like, for example, we just played the storm surge barrier. Let's see what the difference. Yeah, the Climate Youth Collective, they didn't like that. They don't want to see storm surge barriers. They want to see natural solutions, right? Fishermen didn't like it either. It impacts the fisheries. So that's kind of the point of the game. Keep an eye on that. A couple more things. I know this is like a wash, and I'm just throwing a lot at you, but again, this is a game that's really meant to be played with a facilitator. So it all gets explained. So there's also a local news section. So again, roll the die, land on a spot, read the newspaper, and you might get a local news section. So this introduces different funds that you may have got, that you've applied for or maybe got. So in this case, state-funded resilience package supports marshes, roads, and homes. A cross-sector grant package will fund projects across Cape Ann, from restoring salt marshes to raising key roads to helping homeowners flood-proof. Officials call it a no-silo solution that reflects interconnectedness of Cape Ann's climate risks. It touches nearly every zip code, said a local climate officer. So what you do, you turn over these cards, and then that results in you getting little tokens, which you can use instead of money. So there are those tokens up there. So by now, we're seeing most of the elements of the game. A couple more things. There's national news, so there's different things that happen at the national level that impact the game. So new administration slashes federal climate funding, so that has different implications, negative in the game. Not all the spots are extra. You don't always look at the newspaper for every term. There are bribes. For example, you might land on a space for a bribe, in which case you're offered a bribe, which can help you cheat your way towards cooling those thermometers. So this one says, fast track urban infill housing, and let's just say your next re-election event will be covered. So you get some money, you cool down some temperatures, but every once in a while, when you pull the newspaper, you may pull a mayor indicted on bribery charges issue, in which case the game's over, you go to jail. There's a couple other things to explain, but I think that kind of gets the gist of it. What I just want to do quickly in my last 10 seconds here is just talk about winning and losing, and also what the point of this is. So I think basically you got to keep your eye on that global thermometer. At the end of the game, if you make it around four rounds, that's 4 years in office, you basically do a dice roll and determine if you get reelected. Your odds of getting reelected are much higher the lower your thermometer is. So that's kind of the goal of the game. But more importantly, in terms of like what the value is here, so no research to report. I think we're working on setting up a workshop, which I think we'll get to play this with some folks. And there'll be a facilitator, but also a note taker. As the old saying goes, ultimately it's not whether you win or lose, it's how you play the game. So we're interested in hearing, what decisions do people make? How do people talk about these trade-offs? How do people decide whether to deploy a storm barrier, or whether to green light the hotel? What decisions do people make? How do they think about decisions they play? So it's a little bit of analysis that comes out of that. So the game in itself is a little bit of a Trojan horse, just to get people to have these conversations. Other hackneyed phrase I could say here is the journey is the destination. I think people will learn a lot. Even if you just go and read these and look at the tiles, right, there's a lot you could learn about climate adaptation. And just to get back to what Jason said, the first time I came up here, there was a conversation where it was very clear that there was some mistrust between the public and the government and decision makers. And so the other idea goes back to the very first day of this project, which was to find a way to get both sides to be sympathetic, to get people to understand the kind of trade-offs that politicians have to factor when they make decisions, and to get politicians to think, not that they don't already, but how to balance these different stakeholder perspectives and all this stuff. So temperature check coming soon to the library. I don't know. We'll figure that out. Hope you get a chance to play it.
sit there and then, Jason. So once again, so much content there. I haven't done that game, but anybody who wants to do a dry run, let me know. Let me and Greg know. We'll try to set up several of those if we can. So once again, we'll take questions from the floor and then want to hear from all of you. These are major, major topics, absolutely. But we're going to focus in the next session, too, about from the governance end. And so I have a question for you, Jason. As far as collective efficacy of the community itself, of all the ties within and to other networks through fun and all the wonderful things you laid out, there was a way in which I heard you suggest that government is responsible for setting all that up. And I think here's the other question, is what can all the residents and stakeholders take on as a responsibility within themselves that could be of help to government? I know the new library is very focused on becoming a community resource for these. So could you address that? Like, who's going to take the lead? Is it government or us or both? Or how do you build collective efficacy?
Yeah, when it comes to that question, you know, what's the role of the public? What's the role of the government? One of the examples that we talk about that I think is a really interesting one is the example of the Arts Council in Roanoke, Virginia, where the government provides some scaffolding and some modest resources. I mean, very modest, you know, things like $100, $200. We're not talking about big sums of money, and invites community groups to organize events, you know, just invites like private people to organize events that showcase, you know, the creativity of community members and bring people together. That's one small illustration, but I think the key thing is that regardless of what specific channel for building collective efficacy you're talking about, the main thing is to see its support and its building as a process that unfolds over time and depends on the character of relationships among people, right? Where people in that includes people in government, right? Who weren't always in government and may not always be in government. You know, there's a cycling back and forth. And so it's the nature of those long-term relationships that is important for that construction.
And since you brought up Roanoke and the Arts Council, that was one, as I understand it, minor role of artists, but could you just explain the Melrose Plaza and how the civil society created this multi-purpose plaza in a downtown neighborhood, and that kind of came out of the community as well. Could you talk a little bit about Melrose Plaza?
Yeah, it's another really interesting example. Also from Roanoke, Virginia, this place where community members living around that place could. I'm sorry, I think I'm mixing up my sites. We're thinking of the same one.
Well, it's so relevant for Shaw's Plaza because they have a
Yeah.
grocery store, they have emergency stuff, they have, you know, emergency management planning, they have arts and meeting rooms and training sessions and a grocery store. You know, it's part of a community envisioned plaza, which
I was worried that I saw Shaw's and not Melrose, and I said, you know, but the point is that local people know best what the local needs are.
and local organizations with the scaffolding of the city can do wonderful projects as well. So thanks for coming out of the community as well. So Greg, did you have a question back there, or shall we just go to the audience?
I'll be right back.
Okay. So we'd like to start off with questions for Jason and Dan from all of you who would like to, and Keaton has the microphone, so ask your questions. Yeah?
Yeah, this is a question for Dan. Do you have a bunch of facilitators ready to go for this game, or what's the status?
Oh my gosh, I'm so embarrassed to say I totally forgot to acknowledge my team. Yes, this was a project that I did with 3 students at the GSD, all of who whom would be great facilitators. So that's Caroline Brodeur, who's a landscape and planning student, Brandon Soto, who is an architecture student, and Felix Rosen, who just graduated the MUP program. And I can't believe I forgot to thank them. They did all of this work, and nothing could be done without them. But they're also know this game inside and out, and have volunteered to be facilitators.
So could that, I think Valerie, you said something about the library. I mean, could this be some event at the library?
Absolutely, that's the place. I'd love to have one downtown Lanesville.
Right,
We could-
different places, yeah.
Rockport, whatever. Are they here? Could they raise their hands?
Oh, they couldn't make it.
Oh, they couldn't make it, but get in touch with Greg and me, and we're in touch with Dan, so we'd like to have some of those games tried out. Yes, Jerry?
I don't know if I'm really responding to your question to the subject matter, but I am responding to Valerie's question, who's going to take the lead? And my experience in Gloucester is it's a survival of the fittest game. And the fittest often, not always, often turns out to be the organization that has respected local roots and leadership and is best at rallying the money.
One way. Thank you, Jerry. Any other questions? Lisa?
Have you played this on Cape Ann yet with anybody besides today, or?
No, this is the launch.
Okay.
This is day one.
And so we just need to contact you and
No, come through Greg and me. And
through you and Greg, okay.
right, please, thank you for that. You know, looking out, I'm seeing a bit of stunned silence as you're taking this all in. Yeah, this is recorded by 1623, and so the slides we'll make that all available. I'm not sure how many of you, if you haven't signed up, please do that. We'll send it out more generally as well.
Will Jason's paper be available as well?
Yes, yeah. So let me, again, I think I sat, like, I can't imagine that game, really. I spent a lot of time here, so it's sort of, and Jason, there's so much that you have to say to this. It's like, I see these faces of stunned absorption. I know you're all thinking a lot about what you heard, so let's hear your thoughts. And Jason, you wanted to maybe put a question to the audience as well?
I just wanted to ask Dan, how long is a typical round of gameplay?
Shorter than Monopoly, longer than Battleship.
That's a good answer.
So please tell us all what you're thinking about after you saw all of this. Will you share it with us? Who will go first?
I'll jump in for a minute and just put a plug in for the value of engaging. I know it's discouraging at times. I'm coming from smaller communities where it's the annual town meeting, and in theory, that's the ultimate democracy where everyone gets a vote if you show up. But people would get frustrated and say, the budget's already baked. I'm at the end of the process, and so why bother? And I appreciate that. I understand that sentiment. But I can also tell you that after almost 40 years of working with small towns, a handful of people, not even, sometimes it's 2 people showing up at a select board meeting and voicing an opinion, and that sways the opinion, and it steers the discussion in a new direction. Or it's 5 letters that have come in. That's a lot on one topic for a small town. And it does sway, and it does make a difference. So yes, we need to be better. When I say we, and those of us who have worked in government, we need to be better about front-loading the process and getting opinions at the start, not at the end. And I think that's a real important lesson that comes through as part of the research that folks have done. And it's a really important lesson that I hope we can bring home to our communities. But it does still require everyone engaging, whether it's at the beginning, the middle, or the end. It takes that engagement. And I just want to put a real plug in for that, because it's our community. And if you can do that, you will see a difference. Yeah, you'll get frustrated at times, but you will see a difference over time.
If I could follow up on that, I think it's important to keep in mind that the process of engagement is a relationship. I think it's best when it's a two-way street. And I think one of the things that I hear, when Greg especially talks about doing public engagement, as a community official, he's very good at taking a disposition of learning toward a problem. And I think if you think about the form of that interaction very abstractly, right? Engaging the public in solving a problem together and asking to learn about what people say that could be helpful to solve that problem puts the policymaker in the same position as the public, and we're working on a problem together. The shape of that triangle is really different from the kind of engagement that often happens, not necessarily here, but I've seen it in many other cases, where the problem and the policymaker are on the same side against the public. And the attitude is one of, if we could only get these people to understand what it is that we know is a huge problem and that we know would help them, right? That's a very different pattern of relationship than the kind of relationship that Greg is describing, and I think is doing or has done, at least in the case of Masconoma Park, is the one I'm thinking about.
Once in a while, we got it right.
Yeah, where there's working on a very local place-based problem that requires local knowledge to solve, right? And where you're working on a shared problem together.
So I think, Jason, I'd like to ask you to go back over that Colorado Wolf case, because much of what we've just been talking about is early engagement. But some people who, especially those who've been around deeply in the community for a while, sometimes say that the polarization in that list of groups at each other's throats, and it seems as though every conflict we have makes the polarization worse. And so we wonder if it's even possible to bring, especially after 3A, these very polarized groups of people who, in many ways, are unwilling to sit down and listen and talk with others. So can you, introducing wolves into that ranching area is a pretty polarizing, on each side, unwilling to look at the other side as any kind of decent person even, Can you explain how that was worked through to deal with that deep polarization that can develop?
So number one, polarization is corrosive to trust. We know this. Trust is necessary for resilience. So how do you rebuild trust in a case of trust lost? There are mechanisms and processes for doing that. There's a great scholarly literature on trust that we cite some of. In the case of wolf introduction and what that did to those communities, there were two keys. Number one, informal interaction, where people are on the same plane, right? It's non-hierarchical interaction in an informal social setting. That allows for different kinds of relationships to form than, for instance, other kinds of interaction have that are more structured, right? Where there's a leader and there, are followers or people who the leader wishes were followers, right? That's a different kind of interaction.
Or one side is considered higher than the other.
Sure.
Yeah.
The second thing, and it relates to who's considered higher than the other, is something that those social events were very good at were doing recognition, right? In other words, including people who are members of the community in a way that allows them to recognize themselves, right? So my identity is, you know, X, Y, Z. I see my identity represented as part of this event, right? Like I'm even, you know, being asked to contribute to something that is, that's very important to people, right? You know, I know that there are generational differences in the ways that people talk about this, and so I've heard, you know, some of my colleagues say things like, oh, you know, these freaking millennials, they just all want to be seen. You know, everybody wants to be seen, right? But there's actually something very significant in being seen, right? And being recognized as a morally worthy member of a community.
And that was actual long-standing ranchers with the environmentalists from Denver. And somehow, through getting to know each other and talking, they were able to work it through. I think that's a wonderful model for us to consider here too. So,
Valerie, I have another comment.
yeah, where?
Here.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Hi, everyone. Alex Koppelman. I'm the Community Development Director, and just wanted to thank Cape Ann Climate Coalition, Harvard, and Town Green for this wonderful event. I've learned so much so far, and great to see so many people here. I'm very interested in playing that game. One thing that I thought was interesting about it is that you decided to have a mayor of Cape Ann. And I think if it were that way, it might be a little bit easier because it's a regional problem. We have to work regionally. So maybe the game could demonstrate that, as well as all the different stakeholder groups that have different interests. The polarization of those groups is very evident. And I think that the engagement that we typically see in a New England form of government, it increases that polarization, because the engagement in a traditional way would take place over a public meeting where the only people who would come have a very specific stake in the outcome of the decision that's being considered. But we need more ways to talk to people in the community that's not in a public meeting, that's not incentivized by either really liking something or really being opposed to something. So I'm interested in really meeting the community where they are, and trying to get more people engaged than just the folks who show up at meetings, so that we can have more of a reflection of what everyone wants. But what that game really does make clear is there's going to be some people who are upset. And there's going to be some people who you know, feel good about what happened. And I guess you got to balance it. And you got to consider everything that you can to do what's right. But I think in my role, I'm supposed to listen to the community. That's why I'm here today. And I'm hope that, you know, we can continue to have these discussions and collaboration.
Yes. I appreciate that impulse from all of you. Thank you very much, Alex, for coming and expressing that intention. I might say we might do a separate game for Gloucester. You know, it might be more difficult, but more real. Because we'll get into regionalization and whether there's a potential there or not. So now you've heard a lot. Any final thoughts that you have in the back?
I guess what was just said sort of begs the question as to whether this information is going to get to the powers that be. Is it going to get to the government so that they can hear what we're saying?
Very good question. We work at it.
Well, I can't resist. I'll put a plug in for a new group that I'm working with called March. It's Mitigation, Adaptation, Resilience Climate Hub. So I am trying to work with the Cape Ann communities, bring in staff, bring in board and committee members, but also bring in the public and share information and share resources, sharing some of these studies and get the word out. So yes, we're gonna try.
And the Cape Ann Climate Coalition coming out of this, obviously, I knew we would learn so much from today. So we are committed to collectively assembling some of the most important insights and sharing them with you. And going forward, somewhat from the community angle, the Cape Ann Climate Coalition works very much in the communities, and we've been doing listening sessions on a variety of things. We'll continue to do that. And we're also going to, with UMass Professor Balachandran here, and the city of Gloucester and town of Rockport, start to focus on post-disaster planning, which is how we might be able to recover after a storm. And we're also very interested in the economic resilience and growth elements. So any of those topics within neighborhoods, post-disaster, economic resilience, or any other ideas you have, approach Town Green and the coalition as well. So thank you for that. I guess we're ready to move on, and thank you.
We have one more question. I just wanted to make a comment. Hi, my name is Amelia, and I've been working with Jason for the past year on this project. So I just wanted to let everyone know that we are going to be sharing some resource guides that we've worked on. One is about belonging and fostering a sense of belonging, and it's just a one-page document that we hope can be brought to community spaces and that you guys can all add and iterate on. To help to think about this idea of what does it mean to feel a sense of belonging and how do we extend that to others as well. And that is something that I think gets at those essential relationships between people. And that's like people who are in our communities, but also, you know, people who work in government are also people as well. So how do we think about that relationally? And something that I hear in this room is a big question of how do we do anything when we don't have financial resources? And I think from my experience working on this project, I think there are so many things that are being done that are just coming from an individual's desire to make a change in the community. And so I think like to not forget that that's something that's possible. We are not limited by the lack of financial resources. And I've seen very interesting models and things that are happening here in Gloucester and beyond. So we also have a resource guide that has different organizations, and we'll be sharing that with everyone as well. So just something to look forward to, and I just wanted to acknowledge, I think, the power of people that really exists, and to not forget that amongst all the challenges that are currently being faced.
So to kick off our last session, we have, again, in continuing the tradition of a little local flavor, very pleased to introduce to you Sophia Hopkins, who's a rising 7th grader or 8th grader? 7th grader in Rockport. So I'd love to give a warm welcome to Sophia. So come on over.
Hello, my name is Sophia Hopkins. I am in the 7th grade at Rockport Middle School, and I am also a part of Town Green. I found out about Town Green at the Rockport Farmers Market, where I met Maureen, who told me about Town Green. After I got the information about Town Green, she invited me to join it because I'm passionate about helping the environment of marine animals, especially species like the great white shark. Maureen explained to me that they have a youth climate leadership program for high schoolers. I was a little disappointed since I am in middle school, but she let me into the program. I learned about climate change, biodiversity, and the environment. Then I became the first middle schooler to complete the program. I'm really proud of myself for accomplishing this because I was the only middle schooler among high schoolers in the program. I'm still proud of myself to this day for completing the program. My concerns about climate change are how people pollute our land and waters, which can cause major damages to animals and the air we breathe. I'm also a part of the Mass Audubon Youth Climate Program. The Mass Audubon Youth Climate Program is a program where we focus on the environment and the area around us. The first activity we did was going to some bird banding stations, and we got to watch the workers take the data from the birds. Town Green is a climate initiative where we focus on many aspects of the climate around us. In the future, I really hope for people to care more and take action for the environment, while also to help fight global warming. A quote that has helped me through this process for many months is "Be a legend," because it's always important to be a legend. Town Green, Mass Audubon, and the environment mean so much to me. Thank you to everyone who is here today supporting me throughout my journey as a soon-to-be shark biologist.
Thank you, Sophia. I am not here to recruit, but I'm affiliated with a university down the road. In the next couple of years, come by and see us, will you? So our third and final panel of the afternoon begins with a question that's important in the climate space, which is, to what extent do we think our present governance practices and our policies are aligned to meet the challenges that we'll face? And we're really pleased to be joined by two extraordinary thought leaders in this space. On participation and governance, Dr. Arkhan Fung.
Hey, thanks, Charles. Thanks, Valerie and Greg and the Town Green and the members of the Cape Ann Climate Coalition, and everybody for coming here this afternoon. I'm really pleased to be able to participate in this discussion, and thank you for all of your hours and mental energy and devotion to thinking about how to make Cape Ann more resilient to the changes that are no doubt coming. As Charles said, my name is Arkhan Fung. I'm a professor at the Harvard Kennedy School. Most of my scholarship and pretty much all of my research and a lot of my teaching is about citizen participation and community problem solving in various ways. It's been really a pleasure to learn a little bit about Cape Ann. I've only know tiny slices, and so I'm sure a lot of what I'm about to say is wrong, but hopefully some of what I'm about to say will be a little bit helpful. My main aim in these remarks is just to give you some tools that might be useful in thinking about how you organize yourselves and organize your discussions and problem-solving efforts in moving forward. That's the sum total of what I'm hoping to do in these remarks. All right, so the arc of the comments has several parts. I'm going to begin by really thinking down at the project level of different things that have happened in Cape Ann and think about some of the things that I gather have worked relatively better and some projects that have not gotten done, and then build up a little bit of a framework for thinking about why that is, and can we learn anything about different directions in which you might move forward in your discussions. So I'm sure people will probably disagree about how I've put these projects categorize them in terms of things that got done, things that didn't get done, and then we'll see. But so some of the things that I gather have gotten done are on the left hand there, Magnolia Pier, the seawall near the high school, resilience efforts in the athletic field. So you can read down. I won't read them all, but so those are some of the things that got done, I gather. Some of the things that didn't get done are construction of condos in a paint factory, the I-4C2 shopping mall, although maybe that's still in process, I'm not sure. Some of the other things. And then 3A zoning, other things are still in process, and we'll see, right? And then so what do you learn about things that got done and things that didn't get done so far? This is kind of an inductive approach to thinking about a little bit about the community politics of Cape Ann. So one dynamic may be, I'm testing this out in front of you, is that some of the things that got done either because there was a consensus, which I understand is hard to come by in Cape Ann because things seem polarized. That word has come up a lot over the last months that we've been talking to folks here. More likely they got done because they were low salience. Not too many people were paying attention, and so it just never rose to the level of objection. But through some of those two dynamics, maybe those are the things that got done. So a second dynamic is high conflict with a victor, right? So some things get done despite the fact that there's a fight, and out of that fight, somebody clearly wins and other people clearly lose. And this might be, these might be some of the projects in which that are high salience. The definition of high salience means at least a decent number of people in the community are paying attention. They have a fight, there's no consensus, but somebody wins and somebody loses. A third dynamic, which is like super common, Cape Ann and just about every community in America, is that, projects are proposed and they don't get done because there are veto points, that there's some small number of players who are able to just put down a trump card and say, it's not happening. A lot of NIMBY activity in every community in America is kind of like that. Okay, so we can talk in the comments and the discussion about that both either the dynamics or the categorization of got done, didn't get done, we'll see. But here on top of that, thinking about which projects and the dynamics got me to thinking about three different paths forward. And these are not mutually exclusive, but these are three ideas about how you could try to organize climate resilience discussions and problem-solving efforts going forward. Think of them as kind of three modes of community politics. The first, which I think has been mostly happening, is the muddling through. So projects get proposed, there's a pre-existing kind of sets of people and bodies like the zoning board or different organized kind of groups that are fighting for or against that project, those set of projects. And most of these are defined by the ones that get done by low salience and or consensus. I think most of the existing resilience projects that have gotten done seem to fit in this category. So you could kind of try to keep on muddling through. The trouble is with muddling through, it's really hard to do more ambitious things because of course more ambitious things, more people get affected. All of a sudden it's not low salience, it's high salience, and then the veto points or the strong winners and strong losers kind of dynamic kicks in. An approach that people talked about in one of the listening sessions that we had that a lot of people were drawn to and I was struck by was the idea that you could talk for long enough and come to some sort of consensus about how to move forward in Cape Ann. So this is an approach forward-looking. What would this look like? Different communities in Cape Ann, different interest groups come together and agree on some major climate resilience plan. Maybe a big climate plan going forward, maybe some big inclusive planning process. A lot of people try this in a lot of different places. Some people that we talked to in Cape Ann look back with fondness on Plan 2001, which I understood was led by Janice DeLuto, somebody who I have never met before, only heard stories about. And a lot of people had pretty good memories of this kind of effort and attributed the success of that planning effort largely to her personal characteristics and capabilities. She was really good at shuttle diplomacy, bringing together people, convening, meeting people. Oh, thank you very much. Getting together people from different corners of Cape Ann and Gloucester. Now, three blockers to this idea that we could get to the big consensus approach, that is the second approach moving forward, that generate at least a little bit of skepticism that this is the way to go from my point of view, but you guys know much better, is that it seems like polarization and conflict are substantially higher now in Cape Ann than back 25 years ago. A lot of people said, well, I can't really think of a trusted intermediary that would be as capable or enjoy the confidence of many different parties as Janice DeLudo. And then finally, it feels like, at least among some members of the community, recent experiences with development decisions have felt disempowering and have felt like they've occurred in exclusive places from which they're marginalized. Okay, a third approach, like, I just want to highlight, like, number one is the default. That's what I think has pretty much been going on. Number two is the bright, shining kind of thing that most people feel like would be good in terms of climate resilience, but I'm trying to, like, get you to think twice, like maybe that's not as good as it seems. And then I'm offering a third approach, which I'm calling bootstrapping. And the idea of bootstrapping is, like, don't try to do something really big all at once. Try to build trust and depolarize a little bit at a time through different projects that are small or medium sized, where you can, if you can kind of create the space to learn about the differences and develop more muscles of negotiation and building common agreement. So that's the kind of bootstrapping approach. Okay, so I'm gonna offer 3 tools for action. And these are frameworks that planners and political scientists and people thinking about community power and people thinking about local democracy have developed over years in different kinds of contexts. And so I'm bringing them to you so that you might have them in your toolbox and they might turn out to be useful as you move forward. And so the 3 tools for action, one is about power. The second is about spaces of conversation, of community decision making. And the third is a big category of democratic innovations, new things that you might want to try. Maybe. They're kind of out there, so I don't know. Let's see what you think. Okay, so a lot of what we've been talking about in over the course of the day has been about conflict, but I don't think we've been really kind of talking about it as conflict because it's hard to talk about conflict in polite company. But people who study conflict and power often use this framework from 2 people from a long time ago named Stephen Lukes and John Gaventa that's called the 3 faces of power. And the idea of 3 faces of power is that when you're thinking about a particular conflict or how conflict generally unfolds, you've got to think at 3 different levels. And you should be conscious of all 3 at the same time. And the framework is useful because most people only focus on one of them and they don't pay attention to number 2 and 3. So the first level of power is the level of power that everybody sees, and that's why it's called visible power. So if you're in a zoning board hearing and there's somebody whose property is about to be negatively affected, they're showing up, and then a bunch of other people, maybe people who want the project to happen, they're there too. You see them duke it out. Maybe the zoning board is divided. They have a vote at the end. You see the fight happening. It's completely visible. You know who wins and who loses. So that's easy. That's all you need to know about the first level of power. The second level of power is called hidden power, and that's called agenda setting. A lot of people think of it as agenda setting. So in this meeting, Charles and Valerie and Greg probably set the agenda, right? So there's a lot of things we're talking about. We're talking about governance. We're talking about budgets. But there's a lot of things we're not talking about also that are relevant to climate. So whoever organizes the meeting is operating strongly on this second level of power. They're deciding the things we talk about and the things we fight about. But a whole set of important decisions is what we're not talking about and what we don't get to fight about. And then the third level of power, John Gaventa called it invisible power. And that's, you can think of that more like culture and deep assumptions that we have. And so even in Cape Ann, there are fights at this third level. And you don't really think of them as fights, but they're absolutely fights. So think of, like, in talking to Valerie, like, I think one of the cultural differences is some people think, okay, well, the way forward for Cape Ann and Gloucester is modernization and tourism, and we got to have big hotels, and we got to have people from Boston coming up, and that's the future, right? And so if enough people come to believe that as the culture, then that really directs a lot of the development decisions and the climate resilience decisions that follow from that. That's a cultural decision. Other kinds of fights about in this third level about culture is like, how much do we honor the past of Cape Ann and Gloucester? How much do we keep the fishing industry and the whole, not necessarily as that industry, but some version of it going into the future, and it must be continuous with the past because that's who we are, right? That's like totally different from the modernization, shiny hotel kind of path. That's a cultural path, and if enough people, if everyone in Cape Ann comes to believe that second thing, then all of these development decisions go and climate resilient decisions kind of are colored in a different way. And so this third level of fight, and indeed, Town Green and the Cape Ann Climate Coalition is operating very strongly on that third tier of power, and I think kind of winning in the sense that the coalition's objective is to get everybody in Cape Ann to think, yeah, we got to take for granted that climate change is happening and increase the salience of that general problem, and we all got to get off our asses and do something about it. And if you can get everybody in Cape Ann to believe that, that is a huge victory, regardless of what happens at level 1, at the project level, or level 2, okay? So that's like a lot of people have found that a useful way of thinking about power. Okay, so just super quickly, I want to talk a little bit about another kind of way that people think about community politics, and Jason brought this up a little bit. This is a distinction between where politics occurs. You can kind of think about this in terms of venues, right? So, and again, this is John Gaventa, is making a distinction between closed spaces of politics, invited spaces, and claimed spaces. So closed spaces, right, where a city council is, the city councilors are making a decision and maybe nobody else even knows the meeting is occurring, right? Or it's a group of planners making a decision that then they roll out later, but you set the parameters beforehand. Or maybe it's the budget departments that's making a set of decisions all by itself. All of those are closed spaces. And then a lot of local politics is about prying open those closed spaces. Like, at minimum, we want to know what you guys are talking about and the arguments that you made back and forth. And then on the kind of prying it, when you pry it way open or more open, then you actually get, other people actually get to go and get a seat at the table. And so John sometimes called these invited spaces. That's the second row. And invited spaces are like a zoning board hearing where you actually get to go and listen to the arguments back and forth. And maybe even toward the end of the meeting, you get to walk up to a microphone and say what you think. And then the third row, which people talk less about in polite company, is called a claimed space. And this is really important to John because he thinks a lot of invited spaces are, it's hard to exercise power there because somebody else, usually a local government, has done the inviting. They're setting all the rules of how conversation happens in that space. And John says, well, it's important to think about spaces where politics occurs that aren't invited, that are claimed spaces. And so, like, the classic claimed space is when some people who don't like segregation in the South decide to sit at a Woolworths counter. They're not supposed to be there, but they sit down, they claim that space. Or workers in the 1930s in a GM factory decide to sit down at their job at the plant. They're claiming that space, right? And so in some ways, I think of this meeting as a combination of 2 and 3, right? The idea, at first you get the grant, then maybe Valerie calls Charles and they cook up a scheme, and so they're creating a space that wouldn't have otherwise be there, right? So they're claiming space in Cape Ann that wouldn't have otherwise existed. So there's a third row component to it, but then also it's an invited space. They invited me, they invited Jason, they invited Diane and other people, and they invited all of you, right? So it has both of those characteristics, But for sure, it's not a closed space. And indeed, I think part of the effort is to say some of these discussions should be happening in more open spaces. This is like a way of thinking about where politics occurs. Okay, third kind of set of tools in the toolbox here. Again, this is just like, I don't know whether you'll use any of these, but it might help you to have some of them, right? But you might use them, right? And so I'm deeply involved in a kind of field called democratic innovations, where we look around all kinds of places in the United States, other countries, and see how are people organizing democracy differently. New and creative ways of engaging residents, policymakers, to generate information, to solve problems, to share perspectives. And I just want to give you 2 examples of democratic innovations that are happening all over the place, dozens and dozens. In each of these cases, hundreds of examples around the world of each of these, just to kind of get the juices flowing for how you might engage each other and other people in Cape Ann on some of these climate discussions and questions. The first example is participatory budgeting, which some people may have heard of, but maybe a lot of people haven't. How it works is that a government allocates some amount of money. So Boston, for several years, has been allocating $1 million a year. Boston's version is only youth. It's only people high school or younger who are able to participate. That's the only, all other versions of participatory budgeting I've heard of are for everybody, and mostly adults. And the dynamic is that people like in Gloucester or or maybe Cape Ann as a whole would propose projects. Like maybe we want to redo an athletic field, or maybe there's a place here that we could reconstruct. And they would propose and develop those projects. That would be stage 1. And stage 2 is everybody in Cape Ann, say, if that were the jurisdiction, would vote on the projects. And maybe there'd be enough money for 10 of those projects, and the top 10 vote getters would get funded. That's what participatory budgeting is. It was invented in a city in Brazil that allocated a ton of money to it for individual neighborhoods to vote on what their priorities would be. Here it's electrification. Oh no, we need a community center. And they cut out basically the city council, and they cut out a bunch of other people, and it's an idea of going straight to neighborhood residents to decide what they want directly. There it was a anti-corruption kind of program. In other places it's been more of a community engagement program. So can you imagine participatory budgeting for climate resilience adaptation projects in Gloucester? Like, what would that look like? It would be a way to get people involved in, it's very powerful for several reasons. One reason it's powerful is because people actually visibly exercise power in a way that they feel and is undeniable, right? It's not like going to a community meeting and offering an idea and not knowing whether anybody's heard you or whether they do anything about it ever, right? You propose a project, you know whether that project won or lost, and then you get to spend money on it, right? Okay, second example is a sit-in assembly. So some people may have heard of this as well. There are like hundreds of them now all over the world. So the idea is that a convener, could be a local government, could be Town Green, could be the League of Women Voters, sets up a topic, i.e. planning and development of a public area. I don't know, like many of the big developments that have come up in the course of our discussions here. And then what they do is they select an assembly. Could be 12 people, could be 100 people, at random. It's like a jury. You just go through a phone book and you pick 100 people, and then that assembly meets and deliberates for a set period. Could be a weekend, could be 10 weekends, they vary. And then sometimes they decide themselves about what happens. More often they make a recommendation to the city, or sometimes they make a recommendation to the town or the larger jurisdiction for a direct referendum, right? So this is like, it sounds kind of crazy because it's not as common in the United States as it is in other places. But one example that is pretty important, not from climate area, but from another, is in California. It's not exactly random. It has a random element to it, but there are 15 people that are constitute this assembly for redistricting in California. that decide how the political district maps are drawn. It's not the state legislature, it's not retired judges, it's not mathematicians, it's regular people. And turns out they draw really good maps, like way better than, Massachusetts legislature, way better than Massachusetts legislature, but way better than pretty much any legislature, right? So it's kind of a mind-blowing thing. Criminal juries have a great amount of legitimacy in the United States. Probably most people have served on a jury. People really like them, both serving on them, but also like as an institution to decide things. And so this is a generalization of that idea of randomly selecting people to decide things. Okay, and in Europe, there have been over 200 climate assemblies at all levels of scale, from individual development projects up to priorities for all of France, right? And so it's kind of a striking mechanism. So I thought I'd offer some food for thought there for you. What would be a good topic of discussion for Gloucester, Cape Ann, for a climate assembly? Kind of food for thought there. Okay, some questions here that are still open. I mean, I know a lot more than I did a few months ago, but still very, very little. What are the groups that generate polarization? And some people have said on a scale of 1 to 10, polarization in Cape Ann is 5,000. I remember that quote. It was like, sticks in my head. It was remarkable. And then what are the low-hanging fruit for which muddling through that first path, because that's the easiest path that you could get done? And then what are the most important projects that are bigger climate resilient projects for which you might want to bootstrap up or try to think about, are some of these other mechanisms, like a citizen assembly, appropriate or would be an interesting experiment? And then what projects that are medium-sized projects would you choose to try to bootstrap up so that people could build more trust and like get that 5,000 down to 4,500 and maybe 4,000, and then maybe after a while you could get down to 11, right? Okay, so just some summary points before I hand it over to Diane. So my approach here has been inductive, has been very, very kind of bottom up in terms of, okay, let's begin by looking at the projects here and direct experience over the last decade or so, and which ones have zigged and which ones have zagged, to try to figure out the modalities of success and failure, and then offer some tools, potential tools for green action. Valerie was pointing out in some of our email correspondence, which I don't have time to talk about, and I don't really have anything useful to say about because it's pretty challenging at this point, but that we should be very cognizant that a condition that conditions all of the discussions and possibilities are constraints at the federal level, but then also constraints at the state level. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Archon. We've been very fortunate to have the time and attention and expertise of all 6 of our academic advisors. Archon in particular, as he is director of the Ash Center for Democratic Governance and Innovation, is desperately trying to defend democracy. So thanks for being here. Last but not least, it's my pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague, Dr. Diane Davis. Divided we drown.
Hi, everybody. I just want to make sure I know how to work this. Just this guy? Yes. Cool. Yes, I'm so grateful to Charles for involving me in this project. I not only get a chance to meet Greg and Valerie and amazing people here in all of Cape Ann, I've had the extraordinary opportunity of working with colleagues at Harvard across the university. It doesn't happen very often. So not only within the Graduate School of Design, Rachel and Jesse and Dan, but also Jason Beckfield, a fellow sociologist, and I'm going to come back to that theme in a second, and Archon Fung, a major political scientist. And I think I've learned as much working on this team and the way we look at each other's work, how much we have a lot of overlap, as you'll see in a second, but also some different ways into the problem. It's just a very powerful way to think cross disciplines about a single problem. And so thank you so much, Charles, for bringing me into this. I want to say, again, I mentioned that I'm trained as a sociologist. I teach in a planning school, but I teach on governance and politics and democracy. And got asked to be on this team on governance. Maybe I could have been in the social engagement one, not the economics one. It's not my expertise, although I'll have some reference to that. But I mean, I think what I'm going to share with you today is my effort to think about all these elements, how people interact here in Cape Ann, in space, about major problems that affect their lives and the livelihoods of their grandparents and their grandchildren. But think about it in a new territorial scale. So that is my objective. I'm not going to repeat the title of my report, which is available on the website, and I'd love for you all to look at it, write me, tell me what you liked, what you didn't like, maybe build on some of my ideas and have more recommendations. So it's really an open document, originally called Divided, Divided We Drowned. I don't want to highlight the negativity of the idea of divided we drowned, and I want to focus on the main point of the report, which is to think about the possibilities of cross-municipal cooperation for climate resilience in Cape Ann. This just gives you a little bit summary of what we wrote in the report. We built on fieldwork, literature, interviews here in the Cape Ann area, not as robust as we could have done. We built a lot on the marvelous reports that the Cape Ann team, Sarah, Charles, have been undertaking for several years. But I also want to underscore that I'm working on questions of water management, water cooperation in other parts of the world and in other parts of the United States, none with the kind of, I would say, closeness in an emotional sense, but also physical sense as here in Cape Ann. And I'm convinced that we need to think about cooperation across the existing political boundaries that most people are working within. Now, you could read this idea about cross-municipal cooperation as being about across all these silos, these divided groups we've been hearing about, even in Gloucester. So there is cross-municipal cooperation within a single municipality, but I am really energized to think a little bit more about cooperation between municipalities. In other words, moving beyond the territoriality of the governance institutions that we have or that we've felt and that are constraining decisions about what to do with climate change. Another way I like to talk about this is to force us to think about the ways in which 19th century political institutions are not prepared to confront 21st century political problems. And this is where I'm thinking specifically of the Anthropocene, problems of climate change, but we could also ask ourselves the question, at what point do ideas that were political boundaries that were drawn several hundred years ago, are those the boundaries that we have to keep operating within if we're going to solve problems that, guess what, may cross those boundaries? We can all go back, and what I love about working in Cape Ann is, and you'll see this is kind of the highlight near the end of my presentation, the deep love for and appreciation of history, American national history, patriotic history, political history is everywhere in Cape Ann. And there was a reason that we had the political institutions drawn the way they were at a certain historical moment. Around democracy, we all thought that the closer you were, the smaller the scale, the closer the elected officials and citizens were, the more democratic the consequences. And I'm not criticizing that idea, and I'll have a slide with democracy on it too, just like Archon did. But I want us to think about the ways in which those institutions may be as much as the problem to kind of really move the envelope with respect to climate questions and resilience. Now, it's not only a general question or a general mandate for us to think in the 21st century about political institutions, because again, I'm teaching in urban planning, I'm an urbanist. the way the boundaries were drawn around municipalities or cities or whatever, I won't get to states or nations, another conversation, had to do with existing settlement patterns, what the demography was, what the economy was, what the politics were. We're living in a totally different world. I'm not even talking about the last 100 years, even the last 30 years. Urbanization, land use, densification, the building of McMansions, everything we do and how we use land now is very different. And it is challenging those political institutions, that boundaries around the towns. But again, when we're dealing with water questions, water does not stop at a political boundary. And if you want to solve problems with water, you have to think like your water. You have to have the fluidity that water has. You should be innovative and flow with what is the territoriality that you need to kind of operate around. So, in our report, we talk a little bit more. I'm going to just repeat what's already been shared with some of my colleagues. We built on the fact that there was a lot of mistrust of existing government actors. Let me just also say that I identify myself in this report and this team as being about governance, not government. For me, and it's really important to think about the social contract between citizens and authorities. And that's what I mean when I'm going to be talking in a few minutes a little bit more about a different territoriality to solve water problems in Cape Ann. So, I mean, I think that what we've been doing and was building on and talking to people, thinking about the distrust, and a lot of this distrust, as we just heard from Archon, is between citizens and their elected officials in their municipalities. And I'm not saying that's going to go away, but that's another layer of the problem with dealing with water that doesn't stop at that border again, to make my point. So there's mistrust, but there's also neighborliness. I love this word neighborliness, and I want you to think about neighborliness as more than just, and the social efficacy study that Jason's talking about, more if the letter drops right next to your house on your street, that's neighborliness. But what if the bridge collapses in the municipality next to you, and that's a part of your everyday life, that's a part of your neighborhood. So thinking about the notion of neighborliness, I want to say this report was completed with the work of Sam Potter. Sam, put your hand up there. Sam helped, and Clara de Castro, so great students, and they know when I teach urban planning theory that I'm always really, I don't want to say down on the notion of community, but I always tell them, don't throw that word around so easily, as if we know what the community is, or a community. As we know about the polarization here, there are many communities. So I prefer the notion of neighborliness as a way of thinking, because neighborliness does not necessarily mean that you've drawn a circle around who's in. It is about the connections and the relationality. Anyway, I want to go quickly because we have time. So what we're trying to do, to think about a more regional way of solving water problems. So what I call it, you called it collective efficacy. This slide calls it collective action on a regional scale. But I think that the point I want to make here is that we want to think about a new territoriality, or understand historically that Cape Ann presents itself to itself as a region, or at least that's part of the communication. It doesn't mean that every problem makes sense and everybody has the same experience, all parts of Cape Ann, but I really want you to think about a new regionalism for climate resilience in Cape Ann. And maybe I shouldn't even call it new regionalism. Reimagine the history of the region that's already everywhere, in every building and every painting and every place you go, to kind of reimagine that was, as the great scholar Benedict Anderton, political scientist, talks about imagined communities to talk about nationalism. The imagined community of allegiance in Cape Ann might be Cape Ann. And it's not Cape Ann as filtered through Manchester by the Sea, Gloucester, Essex, and on and on and on. So I want, and I've had some very productive exchanges with Valerie, my biggest critic, on this question because I'm trying to underscore, I don't want you to think that what we are proposing in this report is some kind of technocratic decision made at the federal level or the state level that somebody says, okay, we're going to make that like an EPA region. We're going to make that this a region and all the decisions are going to be decided, or even the state legislature in Massachusetts. We develop in this report the notion of regionalism from below. In other words, how do we create a sense of connectivity, solidarity, networking among neighbors in a region that shares a water crisis? So here's my democratic innovation slide, and I want to think about this as a democratic innovation for the 21st century, just the way the struggles over back in the founding of the United States and creating autonomous towns and regions, and then of course independence, which we're all watching Ken Burns these days. But thinking a little bit more, what is a democratic innovation that will be true to the principles of connectivity and that will also allow us to solve climate change problems? So we ask these kind of rhetorical questions about how could we start a conversation and action to create, strengthen a regional solidarity in Cape Ann to be so institutions and actors would be poised to make the kinds of decisions we heard about from Rachel this morning about like assets transferring from the coast to inland. Those things aren't not only going to happen within a municipality. You need a conversation across municipalities to do some of the financial or the landscape interventions that you need to do. It's not going to happen only within a single municipality. And this is what we mean by thinking about how can that be done democratically, to not undermine, and I want to underscore, we're not saying you get rid of municipalities or local activists, but how do you layer all that activism together around a regional sense? So and one argument that we make in the report is to mobilize the existing institutional landscape. There are some organizations that are operating regionally, but they're not all interested in the same thing. They have different entry points. There are lots of institutions that are maybe not organizing around regionalism defined the way I would define it, but they're organizing around things as in arts, painting, historical understandings, that it's implicit about the region. It's implicitly acknowledging or recognizing the region. So we spent a lot of time looking at what are the existing institutions and how they could be brought together in a different way. And I've just got 3 more slides. We have 6 final recommendations. And again, I'd love you to read the report. I'd like to hear from you. The first one is about youth-oriented programming, and shout out to Sophia, because I sat here this morning with Sam, and we were saying, well, everybody in this room is about my age, and we all care about our, kids and et cetera. But when Sophia first asked the question, I didn't even know she was going to give the speech here. So shout out to Sophia, but this is the generation. So these activities about identifying regional consciousness have to start with the youth and have them understand the history and the regionalism. The second one is, looking public art institutions. It's already there kind of, but it could be built around and develop more to talk about what everybody has shared historically in common and could continue to share in common. Third one, we have in my field of urban planning, visioning workshops. People could get together and talk. It's not quite as beautiful as the game that Dan shared with us, but we could get together and vision how would we connect regions? How would we do infrastructure? How would we think about different conversations across the municipalities? The last 3 recommendations have to do, again, with thinking about the concreteness, not just the general imagined community of the region, but like the specific problems that can only be solved regionally, of which infrastructure is one. Second one, we propose this idea of a Cape Ann water commons. Notice all these are in different entry points. They're not all going to deal with the next storm per se, but some might more than others. The point is, well, and I'll get to the third one in a second, the point or the 6th one is to kind of continually work on the formation of regional identity and regional allegiances. It's a long-term project. It is not easy, but it's worth doing. The last recommendation that we have is the idea of a water energy nexus. And this is just to respond to, and again, the great work of Jesse and Rachel, that like this is not just like fun to talk about a new identity, because money is at stake, people's lives are at stake, investments are at stake, insurance. So we have found, we have some, we've met with folks in Cambridge who are working on a water energy plant in New Bedford. Sorry to bring up New Bedford, because I know in Gloucester people are very unhappy about New Bedford because it's a working port, but whatever. That you kind of, can you generate income working regionally to solve an infrastructure problem? So that the regional thinking linked to infrastructure also could generate revenues that could be used to distribute things. So my last slide, Charles. The last thing I wanted to say, and I was so touched by the poem and the song this morning, where there was a reference to Essex Shipbuilding in 1886, if I wrote it correctly, and the song about Gloucester, but referencing other parts of Cape Ann. So my last slide is I think you have an incredible opportunity here in Cape Ann to draw on the past to create the future. It's everywhere. History is in everything where you walk. I was looking at this amazing mural, etc. And there are examples. These last two photos, thanks to Sam again for this and all the other work on the report. The first one on the top is the kind of cooperative hospital put up for the entire Cape Ann during the 1918 flu epidemic. He's done historical work on the patriotism and on both in earlier periods of struggles over American independence, but later during the World Wars, where everybody in the municipalities came together in Cape Ann. It's called Cape Ann for a reason. There is that history. And I think that we use that history as inspiration and model for moving forward. Thanks.
So once again, thank you for our lectures. Archon and Diane, would you please like to come up, sit up here? And so again, we'd like to first ask for any questions you have of our speakers. Where should we sit? Again, full of content. Any follow-up? Ruth?
Do you have any examples across the country of communities who have regionalized successfully? Because there are definitely communities surrounding Gloucester who think maybe they're better. And I'm not saying that just happens here. I think it happens everywhere and elsewhere. A lot of it has to do with different ethnicities and color. But I'm wondering if you have any good examples someplace else.
It's a great question, and I want to say that if we get funded for more work, that will be the next stage. It really look a little bit more at kind of evidence. I was struck when Rachel got a similar question and talked about Minneapolis. I want to say that I'm doing some work on Texas and other places where in the American Southwest, where it's not quite the same as municipal cooperation, but thinking about new regionalism. I also referenced some like water assemblies, hydrosocial commoning practices outside of the United States. I guess I would end by saying there's not a lot done, and I think that for me that's a challenge as an urban planner, but also a challenge for us democratically and politically. Why isn't there more regional cooperation, and what are the boundaries? And could it be that we are so rightfully proud of our democracies and the local structures of democracy that we want to kind of circle the wagons around them, but it may be that we need to push for more experiments. So that's a kind of roundabout way of saying I don't know a lot of good examples, but I'm doing work around the world to try to identify them, and there are more in Europe than there are in the United States.
You could also break it down functionally, right? The MBTA is a regional cooperation organization for transit, right? And so there are ones for water. And so, you know, what are some specific areas that are particularly important to climate, like water, maybe some other things, like, and then focus on particular functions and try to regionalize that way. That's a smaller bite than regionalizing, all government, right? That's hard.
And can I just add to that, in our report, we were looking for evidence around here. There is regional cooperation about education in Cape Ann. So the question becomes, why can you do it on one issue and not another? Obviously, one answer is land, the cost of land, property, economics, all the things that we've talked about, but there are models, and one could build on that.
What I could add just briefly, I don't hear Archon or Diane or others advocating for the kind of 1970s era amalgamation like Jacksonville, Florida, or Toronto. Correct me if I'm getting that wrong. The model that came out of the teaching I was doing with law students, planning students, and Harvard College students, there's a course on municipal governance and climate adaptation. The model they came up with and they gave back to us was the Massachusetts Tollway Authority. So regional authority, the ability to raise revenue on a particular set of issues that was cross-governmental. Does that work for you guys?
It's a great example.
Yeah, and I could do one more quick example. I don't want to overdetermine, but I'm very passionate about this topic. I am doing work on cross-boundary negotiation of water on the U.S.-Mexico border, and there are examples of flexible, Charles' point made me think of it, flexible treaties that are negotiated and renegotiated. So we're not talking about drawing a new boundary. Regionalism could be in negotiation treaties that get reconfigured, renegotiated after 10 years or something. So there are many ways to think about regionalism from below, not just top down.
So I'd actually like to introduce Professor Raciti from UMass Boston, who did quite a bit of field work, particularly in the downtown, and has written extensively also about many of the same topics. I wonder if you could resonate off of Archon in particular on what you found about our, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Valerie. Just put me on the spot that way. I was here a couple of years ago with Charles, actually, in an event that Valerie organized. It was Planning for Reality. And one of the suggestions that I actually made in that context was to do participatory governance. And similar to some of the examples that you suggested tonight. And one of the problems, in my opinion, in doing that kind of experiment and kind of piggyback also on the work that Jason presented, is a problem of representation. Because there are specific divides in this particular town, but in general in Cape Ann, that are along racial lines, ethnic lines, language lines, and those are determine what I call a epistemological chasm, like the way in which people from the Brazilian community, the Portuguese community, intend and understand climate change is very different from the way in which this morning we presented and intended climate change. And so when we think about participatory governance, we need to think about representation. We cannot randomly select people. I think we need to put together bodies that represent different, let me call it tribes or circles or group of people that currently make the demography of this particular town. And I think I'm from Sicily, and I was part of a participatory process that put together an agency that was represented by representatives from many different demographics that was pushing the government to do the right thing every time a project was up for discussion at City Council. So that's something that I want to resonate with what you described tonight. And then the other thing was related to Diane. Very good to see you here tonight. We've been in touch for several other projects. So I've been working in Boston. I just published an article. It's called Collaboration in Adaptive Planning, in Planning Theory and Practice. And one of the things about the Boston metro region is that they've been complaining about the fact that this state doesn't have a regional government with teeth that can really implement projects for adaptation. And so in Metro Boston, what happened is that many organizations got created because of the lack of government presence in that realm, like the Mystic River Association and stuff like that. And so I wonder, is that a state issue, or like, can we think about the nonprofit sector getting together and creating something that can substitute the government power in creating what you would describe as an amazing collaboration among political boundaries that currently do not necessarily work together in issues like the water coming in and all the things that you described? Thank you.
I'll just respond super briefly. You know, there are all kinds of participatory designs, as you know. Some favor like representatives of organized groups, like ethnic groups or racial groups or workers or employers or renters versus homeowners, whatever. And that's one way to do it. And that's good for some things, but sometimes the representatives of those groups have positions which not everybody in the group has necessarily. And so so that's when random selection does some interesting work. So for instance, in the California example that I just gave, every capital D Democrat and every minority interest group was dead set against random selection to draw the maps. The people in favor were like Arnold Schwarzenegger and a couple of other small d democracy reformers. But it turns out it's an awesome institution, and they all like it now. They all were afraid that their interest wouldn't get sufficiently represented. That's why we need to have the ordinary stakeholder advocate process and not random selection, because our interests won't get represented enough, right? You know, you're just playing out a little bit more. Some of these citizen deliberations, which are randomly selected or not, but more like ordinary people than people running organizations that get grants and stuff. Sometimes in some communities, they've kind of done the meeting and the process, but then the local public radio or public TV station, or I guess here it would be the internet show that you guys have covering public affairs, will comment and cover the deliberation so that everybody who doesn't get randomly selected can watch what happens. And you know, the power of that kind of decision-making process, just like the power of a jury, is that it's like people watching feel like, oh, it's people like me. It's not the executive director of Joie organization that's like arguing with the city councilor and the mayor. It's just like people like me, and there's a real small d democratic power to that.
Yeah, and I'll just quickly, great to see you again, Antonio. We did look at the Mystic River. We did look at a couple examples of cooperation. Much of the cooperation we saw here and other places, and including internationally, is around like watersheds. There are watershed citizen assemblies all over. And so there are many different ecologies. So getting back to what you mentioned about MAPC, or, you know, that there is work in the Boston area, but I'm not saying that, first of all, I agree, yes, using these other organizations, civil society organizations, around a multiplicity of ideas, you know, organized differently to bring them together is really important. But I want to come back to Cape Ann, where I think there is an opportunity here in a place that not only doesn't have a county anymore, and that's not true in every part of Massachusetts. You have this lacuna, you don't have a county, but you have this history, and you have this ecology, and you have this economy. And those three things are connected. And that you have an opportunity to be a pilot, to show other places. And this is, again, why I talk about regionalism for and not a top-down technocratic, where okay, this is the boundaries of the Boston metro area. Let's draw a circle around it, and every organization that works in there will have to cooperate. That somebody might want to do that, and that might work. But I think here in Cape Ann, the kind of infrastructure, the cultural, social land infrastructure is there to do something very innovative. So I would encourage you to try to be one of the first to bring together this conversation. So that's a little bit of a way of responding to you.
Yes, you have a comment. Oh, I'm sorry.
Wow.
Go ahead.
Okay. A subject near and dear to my heart. I'm a retired regional planner from MAPC that worked on the North Shore for about 20 years. And I was a city planner in Gloucester for about 5 years before that. So you said a mouthful, right? I don't know what to say except that I advocate for both models that you spoke of. I think there is now a case for small, I used to have this argument with Mark Drayson all the time. He said, Mark, you need to get these groups, you need to get these towns into groups of 3 or 4 where they have enough commonality, where you'll be able to overcome the political, and there are significant political obstruction boundaries to what you propose. On the other hand, I am a huge advocate of building a culture of planning from the bottom up, where you have neighborhood councils. I loved Archon's ideas of participatory democracy, where you are, if you look at, and I won't go on, I promise, not too long. If you look at the way some communities have done planning within their communities, a lot of communities who have had success, because comprehensive plans are not enforceable by law in Massachusetts, a lot of mayors have chosen for different reasons to do neighborhood plans that get a lot more input and from the bottom up, and you get a lot more bang for the buck. This is like, pretty basic stuff. But I would argue that there is a lot of room for making the case now for these small groupings of communities like Manchester, Gloucester, and Essex of, like, why aren't you guys sharing water? Why aren't you sharing fire? You don't have enough kids to run a school on your own. Get over it. And then you sit down with the unions and you don't get over it. I go back far enough where Massachusetts tried to organize its environmental secretariat around watersheds back in the 80s, and that failed because the territoriality couldn't be overcome. But now climate change is offering us a chance to get beyond that because of our mutual threat. So anyway, great stuff. Who knows, right? But neighborhood councils definitely all the way. And the way to do a plan is neighborhood by neighborhood, not city by city by city. And you get buy-in and run all your, don't just bring a project to a community, ask them what they want. How do you want to grow in a micro sense? And go with that. Anyway, thanks, I'll shut up. Thanks.
Just to follow up, and then we'll take your question. I'd like to also introduce Professor Balachandran from UMass, colleague of Antonio. And you mentioned something that can bring municipalities together is when they share, like water, or they share something other about the climate threat. Could you just briefly explain post-disaster and island?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. My name is Balachandran. I go by Bala for your convenience. So you can call me that. So when we discuss building resilience, we don't usually discuss time frames very much. There is sort of an implicit assumption that we have the time to build resilience before something happens. But the reality is you could have your bad nor'easter next year. Yeah. So while it's important to, recognize our vulnerabilities and build resilience, it's also important to think about how you would want to recover if something were to happen. So have some sort of a playbook, at least conceptually, strategically, on how you would want to respond, not in terms of immediate rescue, relief, that sort of thing, but in terms of recovery. And economic resilience is a big part of it, going on Jesse Keenan's Doom Loop point of view also. So I think New England needs a more proactive approach to thinking through how to respond, how to recover from potential disaster.
You also, again, back to when there is a clear and powerful common interest, building enough momentum to overcome the history of, and where this phrase island at risk has emerged in terms of your thinking for here.
Sorry, can you say that once more?
Oh, of terms of shared concerns.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like you said, water knows no boundaries. Some of these risks also know no boundaries. I mean, they are organized very differently. So, Gloucester and Rockport share a lot of risk, right? I mean, if something happens, both cities are affected, and all the surrounding area as well. So if you want to respond, I mean, there was earlier discussion on land use planning, land management, how to redistribute densities and so on. Now, those things are also very difficult to do if you operate within the close confines of each town by itself. So there is a lot of shared risk and shared resources that you can deploy in addressing that response. I have one more observation as an external observer sitting here. I was thinking while listening to everybody that Dan's game, if the communities of Cape Ann could sort of take that game and make it their own, customize it, add more local knowledge, more local nuance, and use it to generate discussion about these sort of things, and take it to a wider audience, maybe using social media and so on.
So
That's what I'm
just to
sharing.
add to Bala, as I mentioned earlier, Senator Tar just helped us get some funding to launch post-disaster planning. And I think to reinforce, if one aim is to develop regional identity, and also recognizes that there are very severe problems in common, we know that the island, which contains most of developed Gloucester and Rockport, shares very big threats. The work that Charles had done before, it's very likely, and many of us are very well aware of this and wondering what's going to happen, is that we have two bridges. The Cut Bridge will be down. The access at the Circle will be flooded. Can't get over a bridge. I don't know, we'll walk across the train bridge if it's still there or something. But also the trunk power line comes up through. If that's cut, we could be together out of power. Repair trucks can't get here, down wires. So we could be out of power for a number of weeks, as you have suggested. We share this hospital. Well, if the roads are down, and Goose Cove is in that graphic, that's down. So out of Lanesville, we figure there's nowhere we can go. We can't get food, we can't get to a hospital, but that is a shared identity right there between Rockport and the island side of Gloucester. And historically, those bridges weren't built for hundreds of years. You used to take a little boat over, and we used to consider it, so they say, an island identity that was very distinct. And so to build on those two communities is our intention going forward, because it is about already an identity around the problem and very serious vulnerabilities, not just the houses along the shore, but really our fundamental road, power, water, and access on and off, and food and healthcare. So, we're going to try it that one, which is a mini version, a selective version of it.
I just wanted to acknowledge, I think it's real progress that my friend Valerie is using the R word. You said it. Rachel?
That's funny. Okay. Oh, the only thing I was going to add before was, I think to pay attention, some of the examples, to pay attention to why they were developed in the first place, like the authority example. That was, those were established for fiscal reasons and actually to get around debt limits, right, in general government. So they had taxing power, there was a fiscal reason to develop something like that. And it wasn't around identity, right? It wasn't to bring groups together. Same thing with consolidation, right? I mean, that's about, there's a fiscal problem you're trying to solve. So, which I think is helpful here, because there is a fiscal problem, but thinking, going back to what is it, what is the problem you're trying to solve with this thing that you're developing, and can you embed in it something that also, right, has something about process, but maybe it is useful to use the fiscal, urgency to establish that.
So I will say, I keep asking Greg many times over the years, so Gloucester could sure use Manchester's money. And is Manchester willing to give us a dime? I kind of doubt it, but whatever, we can try.
No, well, what's in return? So it's
right.
a transaction. It's a transaction.
And the negotiations.
Yeah. I had Cullen Buckner over here who had a comment.
Oh, maybe one last question and then we'll wrap it up.
More of a comment, but my name is Colin Buckner. I'm the Assistant Emergency Management Director and Compliance Officer here in the city. I also chair the Cape Ann Regional Emergency Planning Committee. And so I'm almost 2 years into this job, and so we kind of, at an entry point, emergency planning was kind of realized to be a regional thing that we wanted to take on together, rather than taking it on individually as towns, and as there's a fiscal benefit to this, that we can apply for grants together that otherwise we would have to apply for individually, get much more smaller amounts of money, and do things on a much smaller scale. So we're able to do things like we've established a mass care and shelter plan here in the region that includes Rockport, Gloucester, Essex, Manchester by the Sea, Ipswich, Hamilton, Wenham, Topsfield, and Middleton. So that is our planning region, and our shelter region even goes beyond that. We've also developed a hazardous materials emergency response plan. We hope to do emergency traffic and evacuation plans. We're hoping to do a version of a regional hazard mitigation plans that we want to, that's going to include a sub-region of these towns as a pilot that we want to have much stronger regional collaboration in. We want to have much stronger community engagement. So we've regionalized that way in emergency planning, and that's going to spin off into so many things. So we're going to kind of make it an all hazards thing. And in terms of other regions that we want to align with, hopefully in the future, is that just state-wise, we have our political districts with Representative Frente and Senator Bruce Starr. We also have congressional districts with Seth Moulton. There's the Health and Medical Coordinating coalitions, there's their subregions, there's the MAPC planning regions, the MVP planning regions, there's the Coastal Zone Management planning regions, there's the MEMA planning regions, there's the Department of Fire Services planning regions. So when you're talking about regions, we have so many that are doing different things, and we have these very similar discussions that we've had here today. It's getting them to align. So there's lots of work being done, but in just a very fragmented way, which is, I hope that will, through conversations like this today that have been so great, that we want to align with everything else and to be even more efficient. So just continue growing the group. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Colin. So now is our time for wrap-up. Maybe all you faculty could go up to the front of the room. We just have a half hour left, but are Jesse and Rachel, and is Jesse still there? And Jason and Dan. And I just want to, I thought there might be 6 of you left at this late hour. So we really appreciate your staying all day and participating. And one last half hour here. And Charles? No? Oh, 15 minutes, I've been told, so that's it. All right, anyone on the faculty, some concluding remarks? Was there something that really stuck out at you that we should put? This is one thing we learned. You look like you were ready to talk, Jason.
Just on the R word, I'm really glad there are folks in the room who are actually like doing regional solutions. So I mean, it's great that you spoke up. I just wanted to say that there's a really interesting example from a very different setting, which is the development of regionalism in the case of the European Union. And they did it through very heterogeneous channels. What the big one was, intergovernmental bargaining, kind of like horizontal regionalism, right? And then from that, you create like a mega structure, you like build the European Union. But something they did that got a lot less attention was the development of sub-national regions that crossed national boundaries. And it just strikes me that there's a really interesting parallel between that approach to building a region and the approach that was discussed earlier of building a region from neighborhoods and other areas of interest that cross jurisdictional boundaries.
Rachel Archon? If you went back home and your colleague at the Ash Center and you said, boy, I learned this and this from up there, anything you'd say?
I'll wait. I think I'll wait.
Okay, you wait, because I tell everybody these are the smartest,
Yeah,
most
I
nimble
don't,
minds.
I don't think I have all that much to add.
So anyone else have an insight?
Yeah, I can offer an insight from some of the conversations I had today. You know, at lunch, I had a chance to play a couple rounds of temperature check with folks. And, I was explaining the rules, and which I did a lot today. I have rule fatigue today, I'm sure you do too. But I was explaining about how, well, you want all these things and you want to pay for all these resiliency measures and things, but of course you need revenue, and one of the ways you do that is by permitting this development. And so, you might, people are going to feel differently about that. And the person I was talking to, who I don't think is here anymore, was saying, yeah, that's the problem, is that I'm really pro-growth, pro-change. I love urban environments. I love living, where I can walk places. Part of the divide here is between people who like growth and change and urban living on the one hand, and then people who don't, and people who want to kind of preserve things the way they are. And we had a kind of conversation about the importance of precedent when it comes to changing minds. And I find this like in my planning and engagement work, that like rational arguments for like why we might need something, we're gonna run out of money, or like, like density is good and it's better for the environment. It counts for a lot less than people being able to see something and experience something. And I think that's true not just for housing and design, but in urbanization. And it's true also for regionalism, right? I mean, I think people are afraid of change, and people are, and sometimes for good reason. I think like, I so often find myself in situations where there's a good case for growth or more housing development or whatever. And it always occurs to me that what I'm thinking about in my head when I say, hey, new housing or new development is not at all what someone else is thinking about. They're thinking about the worst possible example of development or change that they can muster, because that's what they're used to. And it's like, I don't know where that leaves us, but like really being able to get people to be aware of precedents and to hear about the lived experience of these precedents, whether it be of regional governance or of housing from folks kind of like them. That's like really important. And one of the many interesting conversations I had today.
Yeah, great.
Can I add, I just said two things about what Dan is contributing to this project that I want to pick up on. This last one a little bit. First, I have a couple. I actually am going to point out a doctoral student here, Sam Maddox in the back. But who is working on rural-urban or rural versus urban. You just mentioned that in talking about when you talk to stakeholders, they have this sensibility that the urban experience is different than maybe the more pastoral experience. It's a big debate in urbanism these days, but I think in this part of in Cape Ann, it's an opportunity to think a little bit more about what are people's imaginaries of the life they want to live, and how much of it has to fit into this box of density and urban versus open spaces, green beaches, et cetera. So I know there are class differences and income differences across the municipalities, but if you go back to all the painting and the history and the understanding of the coexistence of kind of an urban living in a kind of rural context, these are traditions, of course, in planning and landscape architecture, but there's an opportunity to think about what is that mix in the contemporary moment. So you made that point, and I think that's something that people can think about. It's another way of a sensibility or language to pull people into talking to each other. And the second point I would just make, because you mentioned the game, and this is building up on what Professor Bala said, because he said, oh, wouldn't it be great to see your game, which I love that I was the mayor of Cape Ann. So, but, the region, and could we see that game in the neighborhood? Now, I would like to see an experiment where you see how the game is played differently if it's at the neighborhood as opposed to at Cape Ann.
Mm-hmm.
So and that's how you get people to talk about their assumptions. And it's an open question. Would they act the same way if it's local versus regional or not? And that could be a research project. We get students involved in that. So I just love the game too. So that's my comment.
Archon, you?
Yeah, I do have a thought that, as Valerie, your last round of comments, and then Bala, and then thoughts about emergency management, right? So, and then also it kind of grows out. I had the opportunity a bunch of years ago to get to know a little bit this community in New Orleans called Broadmoor that was flattened by Katrina. Like literally the water rings were 8 feet high on all of the buildings and everyone had to leave. And as a result of that neighborhood rebuilding itself, I do believe it is the most resilient neighborhood in the United States right now. I mean, they've built their own like neighborhood level evacuation plan and mutual aid, and for people who don't have transportation or people who need food. It's just incredible, but they became resilient after, not before, right? And so that creates a problem. Like, you kind of want the resilience before. How do you do that? Right? And Valerie, you're saying, well, the three towns in Cape Ann do share this riskscape of the big storm, and Charles's earlier work, I think, really moved the ball forward hugely in enabling people who are paying attention to envision what that was like. And I'm just thinking, is there some way to give people the muscular and kind of tactile experience of a disaster to create some resilience before and raise the salience of the issue? And I think you guys have done some simulations like with grade schools and stuff about what a big storm would, like, what does it look like to kind of keep doing that? Because it's not the fact of the risk that creates the common identity. It's the shared experience of that. That risk can be out there, but you not recognize it, and more often people will deny that it's there. So how do you make it undeniable, right? And a bunch of people in this room are not all, but some are old enough to remember the nuclear attack drills when we'd hide under the desks and stuff like that, right? That is like a concrete experience that makes the risk muscular and tactile and creates a common identity of being subject to this risk of nuclear Armageddon, right? And so can you do that, create that risk identity in Cape Ann? And I think the report is a great start, and a game is one further, but like actually do the driving and, you know, help your neighbor and figure out which bridges are out and what your, you know, kind of an actual kind of regular set of simulations so that it becomes part of the culture, like the diving under the desk.
And Jason, you just mentioned mutual aid, and Jason, that's an example of, I think, Colin would recognize in an immediate emergency, the community volunteers, neighbor to neighbors, do a huge bulk of the work through mutual aid. And so building connections and that capability when it happens, all of your things connect together. So finally, in the minute or two, Rachel, your final comment.
I mean, the only thing I'll add, which is just kind of taking a different turn, in another life, I teach policy analysis, and we have a tool that's called a decision matrix. And what you do is in it, you have on one axis all the options you're considering to solve a problem that you set up. And on the other axis, you have a set of criteria, which are basically standards against which you evaluate these different options. But the nice thing about the criteria is they represent, or I think if they're done well, they represent kind of the perspectives and the interests of all the different people involved. So you could imagine having something that captures, you know, something about physical risk, financial risk, but another one that captures like too much, you know, density, right? This, you know, caring about this balance of density and scale. And so you can look at the trade-offs this way. If you imagine, right, for each option, you can kind of rate each of these, you can assign each of these criteria that are balancing the different interests that are out there. And it feels like something like that could be a good exercise. And the other thing that's useful there is you always incorporate what we call the status quo, so where you are now, right? And because you want to compare that to these other options, right? Creating a regional governance structure or whatever, you know, having an impact fee to pay for, climate resilience projects, all these things you might be considering. And it lets you see, yeah, this will get us more density, but you know what? The risk of physical destruction is going to go down by, 80%. And so it's a nice way to lay out those options and be able to see that in front of you. It's not a full-on, disaster simulation exercise, but short of that, it lets you kind of weigh the different things you have to balance when you're confronting these issues.
Sure. So before I hand over to Greg for his last words, I would just like to acknowledge again Michael, who started us off. I think one of the cultural things you mentioned, Arkham, is that what's forgotten in this struggle between we like urban, we're new, we're so smart and accomplished, and we're going to remake this place in our own image, versus the resistance from those who've been here for many generations, is we always, even today, I think we have forgotten that the stresses on Gloucester for 400 years have probably been about as bad as anything could come. And if you listen to the resilience, we learned so much from Michael's work. How in the world could they feel afraid, watch their fellow citizens drown? I mean, sailors out there on George's Bank, and come back in, and the next day go back out. And there are qualities of innovation and resilience that have been here, and we tend to forget that the roots of this place are in resilience, and those connections, again, I'll just leave it with the ancestors of learning from them and where we are and worrying about the children is we are all largely older. It's what's happening, and our last challenge is young adults who don't participate in government. All of us need to bring them back in, those 30 and 40-year-olds. That's the missing piece that no one has brought up, and that's my last comment. And Greg and then Dick Prouty would also like to say a few words.
Well, we're rapidly running out of time, and I want to honor people's timeline as well. So thank you all for coming. Thank you to the faculty. Thank you to Keaton for organizing and putting together everything. It's been a very informative day. Lots to think about, lots to digest, and lots to work with going forward. I'm not going to try to summarize the day because you all have your own thoughts on that, and I think you'll take those with you. But please take with you the notion that engagement is the key, and that by engaging and by having these dialogues and by drawing in examples from other areas, we can learn and we can continue that 400-year history of strong resilience and making a path forward. So much more to do. We hope this relationship can continue. We'll have to figure out funding, but hopefully this relationship can continue with Harvard. It's been productive. Please avail yourselves to the website. officeoforbanization.org. We'll broadcast that as well. There's a lot of information on the website that goes over all 3 phases of the work. So you got two more minutes. We'll give it. And Michael has another song for us that he could lead us in as we leave.
Hello, everybody. Those of you who are still here, thank you. Well, it's been a wonderful day. My name is Dick Prouty. I'm the chair of the board of Town Green, founder 10 years ago now. And halfway through that, we happened upon Charles, and through a series of fortuitous funding and so forth, we were able to launch. And at the risk of using a stale quote, what a long, strange trip it's been. I think that I want to thank everybody, of course, doubly thank, and particularly Charles, who was always patient to explain to us country bumpkins how the Harvard Graduate School of Design really worked, and how that was part of the challenge we all faced, is making sure that the meshing of what the needs and goals of the school were, and what the needs and goals of the local organization and people were. I've got 3 points. First point is, if you'd said 5 years ago, is the awareness that the seas are coming, it's going to be really bad, and we're going to have to do something about it. If you said, what % of the population agrees with that? It would be a minority point of view. And I really, I don't have any scientific polls on this, but my belief is that we've moved the needle significantly. So it's now a majority position that is true. It's going to be bad. I mean, to quote a local, it's going to be bad. We have to do something about it. And it'll be, all these different sophisticated ideas about structures to do it are going to be helpful. So in the middle of all this, Town Green decided to pivot 12 months ago to a new position to convene municipal government employees at various levels with the okay of the mayor in Gloucester and basically the select people of the other organizations. And we were fortunate enough to get grants and hired Greg Fetterspiel, who fortunately had retired as a town administrator, who fortunately had fantastic relationships with other municipalities. And this is, we've now had 2 successful meetings, and I think the needle being moved to where it is has given us a ripeness to be able to do this work with convening for collaboration at the municipal level. There'll be challenges for sure, but we have to get a few decent projects under our belt, and then we'll have a lot of people behind us. The third point is, I think, and I'll tell a little anecdote. I was speaking 2 years ago through a variety of fundraising initiatives to the president of a local bank. And I was explaining how this, what would happen in the big storm of '38 if it hit the way that the scenario positioned, and we had a 10-foot surge come rolling down Gloucester Harbor and onto Rogers Street. Well, you can probably guess which bank it is now. And she said, well, what can we do? I said, well, for about $100 million, we can put a whole pontoon, a Venetian pontoon at the end that will blend it down from 10 feet to 3 feet. Well, let's get going. And she was serious. And what it points out to me is that there's a reservoir, once people understand the relations, the need, there's a willingness to dig deep and start working on common problems. So I think this is a whole public-private partnership thing where the government, to Jason Beckworth's history, I think the government is a participant in it, but not the lead. And if we want to know where the money is, the money's in the private sector. It's not, even though it seems like a big budget for the government, they don't have a lot of discretion. There's a lot of private capital, there's a lot of money on Cape Ann throughout many of the large institutions, both private and nonprofit. So if you think about the museum, the library, the Y, the North Shore Y, a couple hundred people give $25,000 or more a year to each of those organizations. This is a significant reservoir. And that's their annual gift. That's not their capital gift. So I'm just saying, we're going to need to organize and leverage private capital in the end. It will not be government. That concludes my remarks. Thank you.
Well done. No.
Yeah, let Michael lead us in the song. And again, thank you all for coming. Michael, take the floor.
So I'm going to take you back to the 1870s and a poem I came across, which I've turned into a song called Song of the Winter Fisherman. So just close your eyes and imagine it's January and you're going down to the docks and you're getting on board a schooner. It's not just going out on a day trip. It's going fishing off the Grand Banks off of Newfoundland. You're going to be seeing icebergs and the northern lights. And you know the risks, you know the dangers, but you're just full-hearted, full-bodied, full-souled, taking it on. And think of this song as a metaphor for this task. And you're about to raise the sails, and you just want to get those sails up, get down east, and take it all in. Song of the Winter Fisherman by R. Calder. Up, up with your sails to the bending mast, sheet them home with a hearty will. Let the rude caress of the wintry blast every fold of the canvas fill, every fold of the canvas fill. So, sail away o'er the treacherous main, where the Storm King builds his throne, where the finny treasures of his domain we will gather and call our own. We will gather and call our own. Where the towering iceberg's crystal dome is lost in the drifting snow, where the waves dash up their milky foam from the gloomy depths below, from the gloomy depths below. Away where the bright aurora's beams flash over the starry sky, lighting the sea with golden gleams, where the daring fishers lie, where the daring fishers lie. O kings and rulers the land may own, we envy not the great. The ocean frees our regal throne, the deck our chair of state, the deck our chair of state. Oh, here we're free on the ocean's breast, like the deer on his native heath. And when the storm is o'er, we rest on the billows or underneath. On the billows or underneath. What matter to us when the spirit's fled, where the body finds a tomb, in the churchyard with our kindred dead, or 'neath the ocean's foam, or 'neath the ocean's foam. So here's a noble craft to meet the blast, where'er fate bids us roam, and hearts to greet when danger's past, our loving ones at home, our loving ones at home. So up with your sails to the bending mast, sheet them home with a hearty will. Let the rude caress of the wintry blast every fold of the canvas fill, every fold of the canvas fill, every fold of the canvas fill, every fold of the canvas fill. Thank you.